This page depicts the front cover of an N64 magazine, issue 13 I reckon. It's got that big red N64 logo splashed across it, proper bold like they used to be back then. Mario's right there in the middle, painting the 6 of the logo in a sort of purpley blue. Bit of an odd colour choice to be honest, but hey ho. Up in the top corner, it shouts about a GoldenEye Spymaster competition, probably some tie-in with the Bond film GoldenEye, that was all the rage. Remember GoldenEye, that was the game everyone was playing on the N64 back then, changed console shooters forever it did. Backer. Big headline screams, N64 First Birthday Awards, and Greatest N64 Game in the World. Bit dramatic, isn't it? It's only been out a year, hardly a lifetime of games to choose from, but they were always good at making things sound epic. It says, shock result, so you just know they are trying to wind everyone up about what game got the top spot. And it's not what you think. Oh, very clever magazine people, very clever. Down in the corner, there's a little R-Wing spaceship from Star Fox 64, or Lilac Wars as we called it here, and it says free book, no free double game guide plus, cheeky sods. Speak sternly to your news agent, it says. Haha, like anyone actually spoke sternly to their news agent. So yeah, typical N64 magazine cover from back in the day, lots of bright colours, Mario being all iconic, and promises of big reveals inside. Cost you £2.95, which wasn't cheap back then, but you probably still begged your mum for it anyway. This page depicts the front cover of N64 Magazine, and it's issue 13 from March 1998. It's all about the N64's First Birthday Awards. Mario and Yoshi are plastered across the front, looking rather pleased with themselves. Apparently inside they're revealing the greatest N64 game in the world, and they are saying it's not what you think, which is a bit of a tease, isn't it? I bet everyone back then was hoping for Zelda or Mario 64 to take the crown, but knowing these magazines it could be something a bit more left field. Moo. Down at the bottom there's a little strip showing some games. There's 1080 Snowboarding, which was a decent launch title, good for showing off the console's graphics at the time. Then there's Biofreaks, which I vaguely remember being a bit of a clunky fighter, trying to be all edgy and gory. Holy Magic Century, or Quest 64 as it was known over here, that was supposed to be the big JRPG for the system, but it ended up being a bit meh, let's be honest. And lastly, GASP, which I can't really recall, so it probably wasn't anything too special. So yeah, First Birthday Awards for the N64, promising to reveal the best game, and teasing us with a few screenshots of games that were around at the time. Standard magazine cover stuff really. Cost you £2.95 back then, which was probably a fair chunk of pocket money. This page from N64 Magazine, harking back to when print was king, opens with a bold, "How N64 Magazine Works," splashed across the left. It's basically an advert for itself, telling you why you should part with your hard-earned cash for their mag. They're laying it on thick about being independent from Nintendo, promising honest reviews and covering games from Japan and America, which back then felt like excitingly exotic places for games. They're trying to sound like the proper gamer's choice, not just some Nintendo fan club. Row. Over on the right, under a Welcome to N64 Magazine banner, it's all about the team getting this issue out the door. Sounds like a typical deadline day at the magazine. A bit frantic, a bit last minute. They're talking about interviewing the GoldenEye 007 team at Rare, which was a huge deal at the time. GoldenEye was the must-have game. Apparently, someone named Jez was getting hands-on with Fighter's Destiny, trying to beat it into submission, which sounds about right for a fighting game. There's a mention of Holy Magic Century, which I vaguely remember, and they're also prepping reviews for FIFA 98 and Diddy Kong Racing, both big hitters back then. They're also banging on about a Swiss guide to buying cheap games, which sounds intriguing, and 2 how-to features always useful in the days before the internet had all the answers. And they're giving away a free book on the cover too, which was always a nice bonus. And taking pride of place at the bottom right is a picture of a massive N64 controller cake. I bet they really went to town on that for their first birthday. It's a bit of a showstopper, isn't it? All in all, it's a pretty standard mag intro page, trying to big themselves up and get you excited for the issue, back when getting your gaming news in print once a month was the only way to do it. This page is the contents page for issue 13 of N64 Magazine. It's March 1998, so it must be the N64's first birthday bash they're on about. Right at the top it says contents in big red letters, can't miss that. Below that there's Happy Birthday N64, splashed across the page, with a picture of an N64 controller cake. A bit cheesy but alright for the time. Down the right side we've got the N64 Arena section, starting on page 32, which looks like the main reviews. First up is Fighter's Destiny, on page 32. Seems like ZY reckons it's a cracker, brilliant even, for a judo 'em up. There's a little screenshot of some characters fighting in front of a big moon. Next is Tetrisphere on page 40, described as a fine 3D puzzler, so probably decent enough for a bit of head scratching. Then there's Cruisin' USA on page 42. Apparently the PAL version is finally out, but the reviewer is laying it on thick, calling it absolute tripe, so maybe one to avoid then. Underneath that we've got Import Arena, starting on page 44 for all those games that hadn't officially made it to Blighty yet. SimCity 2000 on page 44 is featured, saying it fills the gap splendidly before proper SimCity arrives on the N64. Looks like they have a screenshot of a city being built. Finally, on page 47 there's Pachinko, which they're calling utter rubbish, so that's a no-go then, unless you're really desperate for a Japanese pinball fix I suppose. On the left side of the page with the cake, they're teasing the inside features. Looks like they're going to reveal the greatest N64 game of all time, bit of a bold claim, plus the 9 others you simply must own. They also mention an exclusive interview with the developers of GoldenEye at Rare, which would have been pretty cool back then, and they're trying to find the best GoldenEye agent in Britain with a competition, typical mag stuff. Then there's 10 N64 challenges you should have achieved by now, which sounds like a bit of a checklist for the hardcore players. And lastly, something about the trials and traumas of launching this very mag. Sounds a bit dramatic for a games magazine, but there you go. Page 52 for that behind the scenes gossip. And that's pretty much the contents in a nutshell. This page is the contents page from N64 Magazine, proper retro stuff here. Right at the top we've got Planet 64, that's the news section, keeping us in the loop about what's going on in the world of Nintendo. They were looking at European game standards, ECTS, that's a blast from the past, and some big Nintendo do over in America. Then coming soon section, always a good bit, 8 brand new games promised in this issue, massive previews no less, and the usual rumors. Ear to the ground, which sounds like a listening feature for whispers in the industry. Plus RPG news, and something about Japan with Max, probably travel or import stuff. N64 How To, that's the guide section, bit of help for your gaming life. Looks like Tim is doing a FIFA 98 guide for qualifying for the World Cup, bit late for qualifying maybe, it says belatedly, so they know themselves, haha. Then track down the best game bargains, with Steve Swiss Owen, sounds like a cheapskate guide which was always welcome, gotta save a few quid on games. And then, beat everyone at the battle modes in Diddy Kong Racing. Everyone was obsessed with Diddy Kong Racing back then, good times. Future Look section is teasing big news on upcoming games. 1080-degree snowboarding is mentioned, next month's ultimate snowboarding game apparently. We got a last-minute peek which is probably a small screenshot, and it looks like it. Biofreaks, what a name, they're freaks. And they're biological, probably. Let's Fight, classic magazine review writing. Gasp Fighters, NEXTREAM. A name to make you weep, but a game to make you smile. Dramatic stuff, another fighter game, must have been loads of them around then. And Wetrix, Mr. Puzzle is involved apparently, swanky take on Tetris, play it to death and back, that's puzzle games for you. Finally, regulars section, all the usual mag bits, subscriptions, Del Boy deals to get you signed up, tips extra if you're stuck in a game, Club 64 feet for letters, James is answering them funnily, right then. Directory for buying stuff, gargantuan listings, they do love to exaggerate, back issues, if you missed an issue, and N64 Magazine issue 14 feet to wrap it up and tell you to read on, and on and on. Oh, and competition stuff at the bottom. Brave N64 readers scrap it out to the death. Nearly. Sounds like a reader competition, with some photos of folks, and a Lilac Wars Championship logo. Lilac Wars was Star Fox 64 for us Brits. Good game that. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 13, seems to be previewing Nintendo's new snowboarding game, 1080 Degrees Snowboarding. It's got a suitably big and bold title, splashed across the middle of the page in red and yellow, 10 Snow, with 1080 degree above it, making it clear what the focus is. They're calling it Nintendo's Winter Biggie, and mentioning that while everyone was getting hyped about Zelda 64, F-Zero X, and Banjo-Kazooie back at Space World, 1080 Degrees Snowboarding was also causing a stir. It looks like they thought it was visually and gameplay-wise just as good as those big hitters. It's funny how they say it was trailed some way behind Link in the most wanted stakes. That's typical gaming press hyperbole, isn't it? The article talks about how at Space World, 1080 Degrees apparently didn't have much competition in the snowboarding genre. They name-drop Imagineer's Snowspeeder and Kemco's Twisted Edge as other snowboarding games, but seem to imply they weren't really in the same league. There's also a mention of Atlas's Snowbow Kids, as a game 1080 degrees will have to contend with. Looking back, 1080 degrees really did set a benchmark, didn't it? I remember Twisted Edge, it was alright, but 1080 degrees was just in a different class. There are a few screenshots scattered around the page, showing off the game's graphics. One caption says something about lens flare effects being a treat in the game, and another one talks about it being good for an evening course, which I guess means it's a decent game to play when you've got a bit of time to kill. There's another caption warning about the sun and needing to slap on factor 25, and slip on your goggles. A bit dramatic for a video game, eh? And another one about broken bones being a considerable snowy hazard. Crash. And burn. Sounds a bit intense. Overall, it reads like a fairly positive preview, setting the scene for 1080 degrees snowboarding as a game to watch out for, even if it wasn't getting quite the same level of buzz as some of Nintendo's other big franchises at the time. The reviewer, whoever Zai is, seems to be saying it's going to be enjoyable and that Nintendo are probably going to do well with it, though there's a hint of a challenge from other games, the Black Ice Runner headline. Pretty standard preview stuff from back then, but it does make you remember the anticipation for these games. This page from Planet N64 is having a look at 1080 degrees. Snowboarding for the N64 seems like a preview from March 1998. Right then, 1080 degrees. Snowboarding, blimey. What a game that was shaping up to be. The article kicks off by mentioning Miyamoto and his team, talking about how they were busy with Wave Race 64 before this, and that someone from Namco who worked on Tekken 2 was involved, along with some British programmers who did Stunt Race FX on the SNES. Interesting mix, innit? They reckon this team's pedigree shows in the quality of the game. Fair enough. They're banging on about the graphics, saying the visuals are proper realistic, especially the locations. Apparently, the snow and ice react to your board, which was pretty snazzy for the time, wasn't it? They're also raving about the lens flares, which dominate the graphics as you bomb down the mountain, changing depending on the sun. Sounds a bit much, lens flares, but alright. They say coping with pop-up is easy in 1080 degrees, and the courses are winding and long, which is good. They're having a dig at cool borders and steep slope sliders on the Saturn, saying 1080 degrees is way smoother and less blocky. Yeah, those Saturn games were a bit rough around the edges compared to what the N64 could do. Controls are another high point, apparently feeling similar to Wave Race 64. You can crouch, pull off stunts with the Z and right shoulder button, all that malarkey. They reckon just watching the snowboarder is fascinating, which is maybe pushing it a bit, but the speed is meant to be something else, putting other boarding games to shame. Sounds like they're quite impressed with the half-pipe snow tunnels and tree-infested woodland bits, calling it an amazing experience and a testament to Nintendo's mastery of the machine. Bit strong, but you get the idea. Beteke. The reviewer, ZY, reckons it's going to be fantastic and a stunning prelude to Nintendo's other 1998 games. They're saying if you liked Wave Race 64, you'll be well excited for this, and even if you weren't, you should be excited anyway. Strong words. Basically, they are saying, 1080 degrees. Snowboarding is going to be the bee's knees, and we should mark their words. Cheeky. There are a few screenshots dotted around, showing the in-game action, bits with night courses and trails in the snow, and they point out the attention to detail. Looks alright, I suppose. Release date is down as March in Japan and July/December for the UK, typical. Always a wait for us, wasn't there? This page from N64 Magazine, it's got a feature called Jolly Lodger, talking about Nintendo's Virtual Lodge in 1080 degrees snowboarding, or Virch as they're calling it. It seems when you start the game, instead of just jumping straight onto the slopes, you get to pick your snowboarder from a bunch of characters hanging out in this lodge. They've got blokes like Kensuke Kamachi and Adam Merriman, and ladies like Akari Hayami and Megan Pishke, plus a few others apparently. Apparently these characters are milling about in the lodge doing their own thing. One's playing pool, another is sitting on a wall, and some are even chucking snowboards off the balcony. Bit daft if you ask me. Then there's a bit about how to choose your character, just waggling the analog stick about. Dead simple really. They reckon it's great being in the lodge, and we'll be able to join in soon, whatever that means. Totally rad dude they've put at the end, typical 90s gaming mag speak, in it. Jeshura. Over on the right there's a load of screenshots from the actual snowboarding bit. One shows a bloke heading straight up a snowbank at 47 km per hour, with a comment saying, "That's not good." No. Another one's got these flaming torches in the level, with a quote, "To your destiny," from someone called Will, who they immediately call an idiot, cheeky sods. Then there's a screenshot of a right old wipeout, calling it, "Bogus man." Seems like they're having a laugh with it all. Down at the bottom, there's a section called Stunts then. They start off a bit sarcastic, saying winter sports games are usually about as interesting as Antique Roadshow Double Bill. which is a bit harsh, but I get their point. But they reckon 1080 degrees might be different because of the stunts you can pull off. They've shown a couple of stunts, STALEFISH, and tail grab, with scores and speed readouts. The reviewer, Zai I reckon it's pronounced, is having another giggle, calling stalefish a good name and joking about not seeing any aquatic life. Classic. Slippity Doda, they finish with, what a joker. This page is all about 1080 degrees snowboarding on the N64. It's a future look section, so a preview basically. They're raving about how fast it is and the detailed courses, and that it's going to have 4-player mode, which is pretty good news when you think back to Mario Kart 64 only having 2-player split screen. They reckon it's a better looking game than Mario Kart 64 and a decent multiplayer experience. There are loads of screenshots dotted around, showing off different parts of the game. One bit mentions Lilat Wars, which is Star Fox 64 to us Brits, and how 1080 degrees has got this intro that's just as good. They're also talking about the canyon levels and jumps, mentioning air and 360 degrees airblind tricks, and mute grab and nose grab tricks. Seems like there's a trick system in the game, which is cool. Warrior. They also mention the green snow being a bit strange, but reckon it's still nice salopettes, which is a bit of a weird comment. Must be about the snowboarders' outfits. One of the screenshots says, it would have been disappointing if 1080 degrees had had no multiplayer game, so they were clearly worried about that but glad it's in there. Right at the bottom it says to be continued, and that they'll be reviewing it next month, March 98, unless it gets delayed again. That's how it was back then, games were always getting pushed back. Looks like issue 9 of N64 Magazine too. Yeah, looks like a decent snowboarding game, might be worth a look when it comes out. This page takes us back to issue 13 of N64 Magazine. Blimey, March 98 already. It's all about Biofreaks, this new fighting game from Midway. They're calling it a mace beater, which sounds a bit much, doesn't it? The big headline is, Biofreaks, freak or unique? Which, alright, gets the point across I suppose. We've got a few screenshots of the game, chunky polygonal fighters, smashing each other about. There's one showing Minotek, who looks like a robotic fella, going at it with Zipperhead, who's got spikes all over the place. Then there's another shot with Chekla and Ella, two more of these bizarre characters. Apparently the reviewer, ZY, reckons these are sturdy fighters who kick each other's faces off. Very descriptive, ZY, cheers for that. Down below there's another set of screenshots, including one showing Zipperhead again, and then another with Cyclown and Delta. They're saying you can enjoy repeats of Animal Hospital whilst playing, which is a bit of an odd comparison. Maybe they mean it's mindless fun. It mentions the US release is autumn 98, and the UK release is also autumn 98, so it's a bit of a preview really. We've got a while to wait then. There's also a little quote box, some random fact about square roots, and then fancier kicking then, which is typical magazine banter, isn't it? All in all, it's a first look at Biofreaks. Seems a bit rough and ready at this stage, but hey, it's early days, innit? We'll see if it turns out to be more freak than unique when it finally lands. This page from Planet 64, the future look section it seems, is having a gander at Biofreaks, this new beat 'em up on the N64. Apparently Midway, who are known for some dodgy games as well as the odd good one, are behind it. They reckon it's about 45% done at this point, which is early days then. Arbofai. Looking at the screenshots, it's all a bit bonkers, isn't it? They've got this character select thing that looks like a Wheel of Fortune, and the fighters are all pretty grotesque, like something out of a fever dream. There's one called Bullseye who's got a machine gun, which the reviewer, ZY, seems to think is a nice touch, bit sarcastic maybe. They mention Duke Nukem and Mace as games they've enjoyed in the past, alongside the not-so-good War Gods and Cruisin' USA, so they're hoping Biofreaks will be another good one for the N64. Apparently the characters are all screaming their heads off and making odd noises, which sounds about right for a Midway game. The fighting itself is apparently a mix of Street Fighter and Tekken, but with weapons, and you can jump really high with rocket boots. Rocket boots in a fighting game, eh? Sounds a bit much. They say the camera is alright, except when it wanders off miles away sometimes. Overall, ZY seems cautiously optimistic, reckons it might be a decent second-string fighter for the N64, not Tekken beating but could be alright. They're expecting it around autumn time. To be continued, it says at the bottom, so we'll have to wait and see if it lives up to any hype, not that there is much at this stage mind. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 13, it's having a look at a new fighting game from Konami called GASP, Fighters NEX Extreme. Right then, GASP, Fighters NEX, sounds a bit like they're trying a bit too hard with the name, doesn't it? It's supposed to be Konami trying to get a slice of that Tekken pie, and everyone was trying to get a bit of that at the time, weren't they? They're saying here that after a bit of a dodgy showing at ECTS, it's finally looking promising now, which is good news. Apparently it's only 60% finished, so still a bit to go. The reviewer, Weaver, seems to like the characters, saying they are marvelous and more Japanesey than the usual Americanized stuff like War Gods and Mortal Kombat, which, fair enough, those games were a bit much. They're going for a Street Fighter vibe with these characters apparently, so expect the usual wide-eyed types. They mention motion capture for the fighters, which was the big thing back then, making them move all realistically, or at least trying to. The arenas are supposed to be a big part of it, with 12 of them and all interactive, you know, picking up boxes and throwing them about. They've even managed to throw street cones in the game, so that's something. The stages have got bits you can hide behind like pillars and walls, which sounds a bit like Mace if anyone remembers that one. Fighting-wise, they reckon it's similar to Tekken, the old punch, kick, block routine. They say it's not got as many moves as Tekken, but there's still enough to get your teeth into. Plus, they've got a move list you can scroll through in-game, handy for us lazy types who can't be bothered learning combos. Apparently, GASP is going to be called Deadly Arts in America, which is probably a bit more punchy for the Yanks. Don't expect to see it before the summer though, they're still polishing it up. The screenshots look alright. A bit jaggy maybe, it's the N64 after all, and they're saying one of the snow stages is gorgeous, which it does look quite nice for the time. They do say the camera is a bit jumpy and all over the place, which doesn't sound ideal, but overall, they seem to think it could be a decent addition to the N64's fighting game library, which was a bit lacking if you weren't into Street Fighter Alpha. And they finish off by saying it's a good thing, isn't it? Well, yeah, I suppose so. War games are always good. This page showcases GASP. Fighters NEX Extreme on the N64, looks like a preview from back in March '98. It's all about the Create Character mode, which was a pretty big deal at the time, wasn't it? You could mess about with your fighter, change their hair, clothes, even their height and build. The page reckons it's a standout feature, letting you create a fighter from scratch, adjusting all sorts of things like hairstyle and outfits. They're showing off the customization screens. You can see the bloke changing his fighter's hair from a bit of a ginger afro to something a bit more sensible, and then fiddling with clothes, wondering about lycra suits or fire-patterned flares. Typical N64 mag humor in it. There are screenshots of the game in action too, looks like some sort of 3D fighter with characters duking it out. One bit mentions a boxing gloves man in pink, saying that's fair, which is a bit of a dry comment. Another one highlights a boxer being easy to beat. Got used to this position, it says. Cheeky. They're talking about changing skin color, making someone look like Mike Tyson or John Inman. Bit of a weird comparison, but alright. And then they go on about shortening the character, widening him, changing clothes to red trousers and those quick-tempered red shoes. Finally, they mention getting into the hood and learning moves to improve your fighter. All part of the character progression, I suppose. Konami are behind this one, and it was slated for spring '98 release in Japan and the UK. Seems like they were quite keen on this Creative Fighter thing, and to be fair, it was pretty novel back then on the N64. This page takes a look at Weatrix, Ocean's much improved watery puzzler for the N64, in the Future Look section of Planet N64. It's got a bunch of screenshots, showing that isometric viewpoint that was all the rage back then. You can see the game has you managing water levels and dropping Tetris-style blocks around the place. Warringtoner, the captions point out some of the game's quirks, like rainbows popping up to boost your score if you're doing well, and meteor showers and rain that affect your water. Apparently mines can cause a bit of bother if you leave them stranded on land, which sounds like a right pain. They even mention little arrows to show where the leaks are helpful, I suppose. There's talk of a scenario mode that throws specific problems at you, which sounds like it could get a bit fiendish. The release info says UK in April and the US release is a bit cheeky. After us? Ha! Sounds like typical Ocean marketing bravado of the era. Watery puzzler, eh? We saw a few of those, didn't we? This page is about the game Weatrix, a puzzle game for the N64. Right then, Weatrix, remember that one? It's a preview, looks like they covered it before in issue 8. Apparently, Old Zai, the reviewer, wasn't totally sold on it back then, but now after playing a more complete version, he reckons Z2, the British developers, are onto something good. He's saying it's like Tetris, but with water you're building up this landscape to trap water. Sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? Kunta. There are screenshots showing the game in action, blocks falling from the sky, building up this colourful 3D terrain, and a tube on the side showing the water level. Looks like you have to stop it overflowing. They mention red blocks being solid, and green ones having antimatter properties, whatever that means, leveling the land out. They also talk about earthquakes if you build too high, causing your water to slosh about, which sounds a bit stressful. Apparently, rainbows and ducks appear as bonuses if you trap enough water, and meteors fall instead of water sometimes. Blimey, bit chaotic, isn't it? Ice cubes to freeze the water too, crikey. They mention bombs and repairing holes. It sounds like there is a lot going on. Zai reckons it can be a very busy experience indeed, understatement perhaps. It mentions the Pickford brothers are behind it. Those guys from Z2 used to be at Rare's old Manchester studio and worked on NES games. So they know their stuff then. They've tarted up the menus apparently, made them groovy, and there's a 2-player mode, and even a 4-player battle mode in the works. Color resolution is supposedly rivaling Nintendo's own games now, and there's shadows, and better piece graphics, and even arrows to show you where water is leaking. Full camera control too. Sounds like they've been busy. Zai thinks it's still tricky for beginners, but movement is quite unique and takes getting used to. Z2 and Ocean Software are trying to get a deal with Blockbuster Video for some rental promotion, free game for gamers. That would have been good back in the day. Wetrix was meant to be out in weeks, with an April release date hoped for, and costing about £35. They reckon they'll do a proper review when it's finally out. So Western's ready, whatever that means, probably slang from the time. Looks like there are little boxes at the bottom with screenshots showing bomb tack, water tack, lost, won, and play again and quit buttons. Multiplayer modes, it seems, with attacking opponents. An unequivocal statement of affairs that? Very magazine-y talk, isn't it? To be continued at the bottom, typical magazine cliffhanger. March 1998, eh? Time flies. This page depicts an article from N64 Magazine, issue 13, dated March 1998. It's all about a Nintendo Gamers Summit over in the USA, which was a big deal because apparently loads of American journos couldn't make it to the Tokyo show, so Nintendo decided to lay on a special event in Washington. The main headline is, Summits Up in the USA, and the article talks about Nintendo wowing the American press with promises for '98. Apparently they showed off Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which everyone was already losing their minds about after seeing it at Space World. They're saying here it's pretty much the same version, which isn't too shocking really, just a bit more hype building. Warrington. There are some smaller pictures dotted about. One shows Link in what must be Ocarina of Time, looking a bit blocky but still, it was Zelda in 3D, amazing for the time. Another screenshot is of some basketball game, NBA courtside I reckon it says, and then another of some snowboarding, 1080 degrees snowboarding maybe. Looks alright. The article mentions a few other games they showed, like Banjo-Kazooie, which was Rare at their best, colourful and quirky, and Cruisin' World, which, well, was Cruisin' World, loud and brash arcade racer fun. They also mentioned some third-party games like Quest, Biofreaks, Quake, Forsaken, and even Gomon. Bit of a mix really. Warring. Further down, it talks about some secret Rare titles, hinting at Conker's Quest, which became Conker's Bad Fur Day later on, though they probably didn't know that name yet, and another Ultra Donkey Kong game. Rumours were flying about a game, based on the GoldenEye engine, but with a completely new character, possibly tied in with the Tomorrow Never Dies film license. Sounds ambitious, and a bit far-fetched to be honest, but you never knew with Rare back then, they could pull anything off. On the left side of the page, there's the usual magazine blurb with staff details. James Ashton is the editor, and there's a list of other names like Will Overton, Tim Weaver, Andrea Ball and Paul Jarrold for art and design stuff. Down the side are details for subscriptions, cost £35.40 for the UK for a year, which seems a fair bit, doesn't it? Issue 13, on sale February 26th, next one out March 25th. Pretty standard magazine info really. Overall, it's your typical mid-issue news page, hyping up the upcoming N64 games, focusing on the big hitters like Zelda and Rare titles, with a dash of third-party stuff thrown in. Standard fare for an N64 mag in '98. This page from Planet 64 Mag is a right mixed bag, isn't it? Up in the shortcut section, ZY's having a bit of a chinwag about Crave Entertainment. Seems they're American and knocking out a few sports titles. Milo's Bowl-Rama and VR Pool 64 are mentioned, sounding like the kind of budget games you'd see down at Electronics Boutique for a tenner, probably best avoided if I'm honest. Then there's a bit about price drops, good news for those who held off on Turok and Extreme G. Seems they've had a bit of a price cut, mind you, they were a bit pricey to begin with, weren't they? Rebon. Moving down, there's a piece called La Spectacle VA Commencer. Very fancy, all about new games being shown off at European game shows, Nuremberg and Milia. They're banging on about publishers showing their stuff over here instead of waiting for some big US show. Which makes sense, I suppose. Ubisoft are there showing off Buck Bumble, which is from Argonaut, who did Star Fox on the SNES, so that might be one to watch. Also, Tonic Trouble is still being worked on. That's been in development forever, it feels like. There's mention of a game called Cats and Rats from Mindscape and Space Circus from Infogrames, both for PC and N64. Oh, and a claim of showing off Wrecking Balls, a two-player version no less, and there's a screenshot of that looking a bit like a futuristic marble game. Down at the bottom, back to number 1, it's all about Nintendo patting themselves on the back for how well they did in '97. Apparently Mario Kart 64 was top dog, no surprise there, that game was everywhere. Star Fox 64 and Super Mario 64 also did really well, and Diddy Kong Racing and GoldenEye were joint runners-up, so yeah, they had a pretty good year I reckon. Apparently loads of adults own N64s, and loads of people with PlayStations also own N64s, which is interesting, makes sense though, good games are good games in it, not on it. And lastly, there's a bit about Melia 98 honoring gaming content, whatever that means. Sounds a bit pretentious to me. Apparently Peter Molyneux and John Romero are going to be there. Big names, I suppose, if you're into all that PC game developer stuff. They're talking about the innovative world of gaming content at Melia. Bit much, isn't it? It's just games at the end of the day, but I suppose they have to make it sound important. They even have their own website, Melia.com. How very modern. So yeah, a fairly typical page really. Bit of news, bit of hype, bit of self-congratulation, all par for the course for a games mag back then. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 13, takes me right back to 1998. In the Planet 64 Inches section, they're going on about Paul's avocado plant. Bless him. Not exactly riveting stuff, is it? Then there's a piece about a French N64 magazine called X64. Seems like our French counterparts had a bit of a thing for leaving notes in the margins. Moving on, Fanzine Farm is all about readers' contributions. Nam Fanzine is featured, apparently it's quite good, and packed with content previews, reviews, features, the lot, and they even cover SNES classics. They mention games like Super Mario RPG, and Kirby Superstar, and Tetris Attack, which were great at the time, proper classics. There's also a mention of Pulse Interactive. Seems like some sort of fanzine that's got fighting game coverage. The Game Zone sounds like a club or something. They're giving a hearty slap, and some wellies to the guys behind it, must be doing something right. And then there's N64 Fanzine, another reader's magazine getting a plug, apparently dedicated to GoldenEye and Super Mario 64, and Lilat Wars, Tafa. Over on the right, under New Goods, they're reviewing some peripherals. First up, the Ultra Racer 64 inches steering wheel. It's priced at £29.99, which wasn't cheap back then. ZY, the reviewer, reckons it's alright for one-handed play, if you're into that sort of thing with a wheel, a bit banana with wheels, as they put it. Sounds like the controls might be a bit fiddly, and you might end up crashing a lot in games like San Francisco Rush, but good for Mario Kart and rally games. Then there's the Gamester wheel, a much pricier bit of kit at £80. ZY says it looks a bit rubbish and cobbled together, but the main issue is the wheel keeps snapping back to the center, making games like Top Gear Rally a right pain. Apparently you need the precision of open heart surgery to steer properly. Not exactly a glowing recommendation, is it? And at 54%, ZY thinks it's expensive, and tells you to steer clear. Bit harsh, but fair enough if it's that bad. They mention Puzzle Dama, Duke Nukem, Chameleon Twist 2, Yoshi's Story, Banjo, and 1080 Degrees in the context of upcoming N64 stuff. So lots to look forward to, or at least we thought so at the time. This page from Planet N64 Mag, it's got a bit of a retro vibe going on. Right at the top there's a Rumor Has It section, chattering about Zelda, Ocarina of Time possibly getting a gold cartridge release in the US, like the old NES Zelda, and some custom N64s. Always rumors floating around back then, weren't there? Warrington there. Then we've got a couple of N64 Rumble Packs being put through their paces. First up is the Joytech Rumble Pack. ZY, the reviewer, reckons it's a decent bit of kit for the price, especially with GoldenEye Jungle Level mentioned specifically. Apparently, it gives a good rattle, although more of a thrum than a buzz, whatever that means. Batteries are a pain though, especially when we were used to the controller pack being battery-free. 78% they've given it. They also mention a Rumble/Memory Pack combo from Joytech, GAE. Next is the Jolt Pack, 256K from Fire/Blaze. Seems like Daytel Shockwave had some competition. This one gets an even better score of 86%. They say it's slick and businesslike, working well with tricky games like ISS 64 and Turok. And again, GoldenEye's Jungle Level gets a shout out for rumble testing, saying it's veritable AR-33 kickback heaven. Sounds a bit much, doesn't it? Perel. The RETROWORLD section is all about older consoles, hosted by Jason Moore. This time it's the MB Vectrex under the spotlight. Remember that thing? Proper oddball with its vector graphics, looked like something out of Tron. Built-in game was Mindstorm, which was basically asteroids. They compare it to arcade games like Battlezone and Star Wars. Apparently, there were about 28 games released for it, including conversions of arcade classics, and even a 3D headset and light pen. Seems like there's a bit of a cult following for the Vectrex, with new games still being made for it even now, which is dedicated. Then there's a look back at a couple of old handheld games, Game & Watches. First is Octopus. These things were everywhere back in the day, weren't they? Simple but addictive. This one's about diving for treasure and avoiding an octopus. 76% rating, not bad. Warris. Finally, there's Pocket Scramble, by Grandstand. This one's a bit bigger than a normal Game & Watch, and apparently made by Epoch, Nintendo's rivals. It's a bit basic with scrolling blocks for graphics, but they say it has different levels and some variety. Gets a 58% bit lower. Maybe it wasn't quite as good as the real Game & Watches. This page is all about upcoming N64 games, and it looks like the main focus is on Banjo-Kazooie, which, if I remember rightly, was quite a big deal at the time. The headline screams, "My name's Banjo," which is a bit much, even for Planet 64. They're saying it's racking up the cuteness stakes and is 3/4 complete, aiming for an April release in Japan and June here in the UK. Apparently some lucky sods at a Gamers Summit in America got to have a go on it, and they were impressed naturally. There's a bit of a techie breakdown, mentioning 96 megabits, which sounded impressive back then, and that it's a single-player game. They're raving about the graphics, calling it graphical juice, and mentioning screen-sized bosses like crabs and bulls, typical Zai, always a bit over the top. They're going on about Banjo and Kazooie's moves, like the Arceus Stomp, and buttock-emanating blue egg thing, charming stuff, and they compare it to Mario 64, wondering if it's better. Bold claim, Zai. They reckon it's technically better than Mario, but question if it has the same level of ingenuity, freedom of movement and invention. A fair point actually. Down the side there's a This Month Including box which lists a bunch of other games they'll be covering. Let's see, there's Gex, Enter the Gecko, TEO 64DD, which is interesting as 64DD was still a bit mysterious over here. Jungle Emperor Leo, not heard of that one. Kirby's Air Ride, Buster Move 2, Wrecking Balls, and Rampage World Tour. A decent mix actually. There are a couple of screenshots of Banjo-Kazooie, looking quite colourful for the time I suppose. One shows Banjo and Kazooie facing off against a snowman-type character, and another one has some green blokes who are described as gorgeous green off-skin sailors. Right then, and there's a little caption saying if you look closely at the top hat of one of these baddies you can see Timber the Tiger's eyes. Sneaky. Oh, and a comparison to Mary Poppins and the turtles in the lake. Zai's really reaching for the analogies here. Still, it paints a picture, doesn't it? This page from Planet 64 previews, or rather takes a look at a few upcoming games. Right at the top it's screaming "Nice you Gexy thing," referring to the game Gex, Enter the Gecko. Remember the first Gex game on the 3DO? Crikey, that wasn't up to much, was it? Anyway, ZY here seems pleasantly surprised by this new Gex, reckons it's looking decent even in an early form, and a bit of a laugh. It's a 3D platformer, like Mario 64, but apparently not quite as clever, but colourful and very film-inspired, with loads of movie references. Gex himself is a gecko who can climb walls, walk along them, and even use his tail as a whip. A bit like that PlayStation game apparently. There are a couple of screenshots, one with some floating footballs, and another showing Gex in some jungle-type level. Then there's a bit about a game called TO64DD, for the 64DD, remember that add-on? This one's described as a mix of Pikachu and Flipper, which sounds a bit bonkers. You play as a dolphin called Finfin, and you can apparently talk to him using Nintendo's voice recognition unit. Righto. Apparently because it's on the 64DD, it'll have multiple routes, and be very writable, whatever that means. They reckon it's the first Pocket Monsters clone, which is a bit of a bold claim. There's a picture of this Finfin character, a blue dolphin type thing, looks a bit odd. Next up is Jungle Emperor Leo, based on a cartoon and apparently Miyamoto's next big thing, and is known as Kimba in Japan. Seems like you're defending the jungle with a little black cat/lion thing, and they mention stunning water effects. It even got a video premiere at Space World. There's a mention of Kirby's Air Ride. Apparently it's been quiet on the Kirby front. Last they heard anything was at E3, way back in '96. Seems like it's still being worked on, and they suspect there's been a redesign. E3 might bring more news, fingers crossed. Lastly, Buster Move 2, looking and moving like the SNES version, but crucially, it's playable. It's got the bubble matching gameplay, and is due out in the summer, though it's not clear if Acclaim will use the N64's 4-player shenanigans. There's a screenshot of the bubble popping action too, so a mixed bag of games coming up, some interesting, some a bit strange, par for the course really back then. This page from Planet N64, issue 13, is all about upcoming games. The Ball Guys headline screams at you, with a feature on a game called Wrecking Balls. Looks a bit odd, these ball characters rolling around platforms, according to the reviewer, and it's from Acclaim. Apparently it's supposed to be a 4-player treat, but they do say it looks a bit weird. There's a screenshot showing these, well, balls. One looks like a red devil and another a green blob with teeth, on a platform with some spikes. Bit like a Mario Kart but with balls instead of carts maybe. It's coming out in the summer of '98 apparently, both from the US and the UK. They reckon it's like Putty Squad, or DMA's SNES games, so maybe a bit of a puzzle platformer with multiplayer. Binduk. Then there's Ram Raiding, about Rampage World Tour. Rampage, eh? Everyone knows Rampage from the arcades, smashing buildings as monsters. This one's for the N64, and they're calling it World Tour, due autumn '98. They've got a screenshot with a King Kong-type ape climbing a building and breathing fire, and a Godzilla-looking monster smashing things. Says it's like the arcade game but a 3-player scenario. They mention the Saturn and PlayStation versions were a bit rubbish, so they're hoping the N64 one will be better. Over on the right, there's a bit called An Ear to the Ground, with some industry gossip. Eidos have 2 N64 games coming, from their Norwegian studio, Innerloop. Sounds a bit mysterious. DMA Design, who did GTA, are apparently doing Body Harvest and Silicon Valley, both coming along nicely. Body Harvest is almost finished, and apparently has RPG elements, a bit like GTA, but with mass destruction. Sounds intriguing. Factor 5, the guys behind Turrican, are doing Tornado, due autumn '98. They're also chatting with Nintendo about better sound for the N64. EA are not doing FIFA in Canada anymore, handing it over to Software Creations, who did create a paint package. And Weetrix developers Z2 are making a 3D platforming game with a Looney Tunes license, Tasmania themed, which sounds a bit naff to be honest. Nintendo are also setting up a satellite station dedicated to games by the year 2000, hope it's not as dull as Sega's effort. So, lots of games to look forward to then. This page depicts an RPG news section from N64 Magazine, and it's all about elemental magic. The main game being showcased is Holy Magic Century from Konami. Remember that one? It was known as Crystal Stories before, and they were making a right fuss about it at the time. Apparently those nice folk at Konami were going to bring it to our shores before we even got a proper sniff of Zelda, which was a bold claim back then, wasn't it? ZY, that's Will Overton from the mag, was saying they were surprised by how much it had come on, saying it's definitely something of an understatement. Bit strong perhaps. He reckons the villages are now gloriously realized cities. Steady on, ZY, let's not get carried away. They're showing off some screenshots, aren't they? One is in a desert temple, which is called a fantastic new location. Well, deserts have been around for a bit, haven't they? Another one shows municipal gardens that you can hire for weddings and other functions. Right, because that's what you want to do in an RPG, plan a virtual wedding. Then there's Brian Blessed being mentioned, saying he wants to shout at you in the game. Blimey, that could be loud. Another screenshot is captioned, Decor, by BBC Two's Homefront, and another one is about approaching mystical floating stones. Sounds a bit generic RPG fare, doesn't it? And finally, a shot of a forest which is described as a forest of doom, or something. Typical magazine humor of the time. It mentions you can enter every building and find a variety of different layouts, and there are knights standing guard everywhere. The combat system is still being tweaked, apparently, but they still have the elemental button attacks. And battles can now happen within an electrical field that restricts your attacking area. Sounds a bit like they are throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, doesn't it? Anyway, Japanese release is coming soon, and they are gearing up for massive coverage leading to the Western version. We'll see about that, won't we? Holy Magic Century, or Crystal Stories, whatever they were calling it. It was one to keep an eye on, back in the day. This page is from the Ask Fusoya section of the magazine, and it also has a preview of the game Fighter's Destiny. In the Ask Fusoya bit, some reader is asking about Zelda 64, and if the maps will be like the ones in A Link to the Past on the SNES, where you only saw the rooms you'd actually visited. Fusoya, in his typical style, is answering that, saying it might be similar but you'll need items to see the full map and there will be outdoor maps too. Yes. Another reader is asking about Super Mario RPG 2, wondering if it's going to be a proper RPG or more action-focused, since the screenshots look a bit different from the original SNES game. Fusoya seems a bit concerned it might not be a proper RPG from Nintendo, as it's being made by a different company. He also name-drops a few other games like Robotron 64, Holy Magic Century, and even jokes about a potential Spawn RPG which sounds dreadful. Thankfully we were spared that one. Essie. Then at the bottom of the page, there's a preview for Fighter's Destiny. Crikey, they've given it a 90% bold statement calling it, without a doubt, the best fighting game on the N64. They're saying it's much better than Killer Instinct Gold, and even reckon it'll put Virtua Fighter and Tekken to shame, which is a bit strong, isn't it? There's a few screenshots of the game showing characters battling it out and logos for Nintendo Magazine, N64 Pro, Ocean and the developers. It's got that Nintendo Essential Buy sticker slapped on it as well, so they were clearly quite impressed with it back then. This page depicts a spread from a gaming magazine, looks like a bit of a retro Nintendo mag. The main headline blares, Nintendo 64 owners want for nothing. And underneath it says, apparently Final Fantasy no longer holds the appeal it did for Japanese N64 owners. Bit of a bold statement in it, especially for back then when Final Fantasy was still a pretty big deal, though maybe less so on the N64. Hakushai. Down the side, there's some Japanese writing, and a section titled Made in Japan, with a picture of a bloke called Max Everingham who's apparently the man for all the Japanese gaming goss. It asks if you've ever wondered what's going on in the Japanese gaming scene, and reckons Max is the bloke to tell you. Sounds like a regular feature. Then there's a Japanese games chart labeled Top 30. At number 1 it's listed as Especially Nothing in English, which is a bit of a weird one for a top spot, isn't it? Below that at number 2 is Final Fantasy series, then Dragon Quest series at number 3. Street Fighter series is at number 4, and Biohazard, which we'd call Resident Evil, is at number 5. There's also Derby Stallion series and Rockman series, which I guess is Mega Man for us. Looks like mostly RPGs and action games in that top chart. The little question underneath asks, satisfied gamers or a more sinister conspiracy? Bit dramatic, even for a gaming mag. On the right side, there's another article called Pikachu Bites the Dust. It talks about the Pokemon cartoon show and all the media hype around it, mentions articles in British and American newspapers, and how you couldn't even buy the stuff in the shops back then. It even mentions a TV show featuring the top 100 best products of 1997, and says Tamagotchi was number 1, selling 14.5 million, while Pokemon only made number 13. It ends by saying you could still go out and buy an N64 and play it, which is the simplest idea of 1997, and asks, will recent health scares mean a change in Pikachu's fortunes? Seems like they were wondering if Pokemon was a fad or something more lasting. Remember all that panic about kids getting seizures from the cartoon? Madness. Overall, typical magazine stuff from back in the day, bit sensationalist, bit gossipy, but good for a read on the train. This page from Planet N64, issue 13, takes us back to March 1998. Right at the top, there's a bit about Nintendo's PR guy, Hongo-san, being a bit cagey about a possible N64 Wario Land game, using classic PR speak to avoid a direct answer. Always good to keep us guessing, eh? Then there's a piece called An Englishman in Tokyo, looks like ZY. The reviewer pronounced Zai apparently is in Japan, playing Yoshi's Story, and Hyper Olympics in Nagano. He mentions being distracted by these games, instead of doing his actual job. He's also seen people wearing hockey masks, which he finds a bit odd, and he's joking about winning a gold medal for Britain in skiing at the Nagano Olympics in the game, and bringing home the bacon, classic. The reviewer mentions 9 new games being released in Japan that week, including Hexen, Yoshi's Story, and Asmix Battle Pro Wrestling. He reckons Battle Pro Wrestling could be popular for street play. There's talk about Sony selling 10 million consoles, and including the DualShock force feedback controller, plus a limited edition black console called the Eurose. Nintendo had a Pocket Monster tie-in deal, but you still had to buy the extra cable for the N64. Bit cheeky really. There's a little comment about someone falling over, bless him. Down the left side there's something about prickler sticker machines getting new variations. One takes your photo and prints it as a sticker, and another makes a keyring doll with your recorded voice. Sounds a bit of fun, albeit slightly weird. Lastly, at the bottom, there's a Learn Japanese section with Winter Olympics phrases like, great, it's snowing, gold medal, you lost, the best, and a reminder of that classic phrase for dodging questions. We can't say it won't be coming out. Handy phrases if you were planning a trip to Japan for the Olympics, or just wanted to sound like you knew what you were talking about at school. This page from N64 Magazine, looks like issue 13 if I remember right, takes us to the arena section. It's all about fighting games, with Fighter's Destiny taking center stage. Remember that game? It had that sort of polygonal look, didn't always age well but seemed amazing back then. They're calling it a brilliant N64 beat-em-up, which might be a bit much, but we were desperate for good fighters on the N64 back then, weren't we? There are a couple of those tiny compressed screenshots, hard to make out now, and then there's the scoring guide. They're laying it out, yellow star for top notch, 85% and above, right down to the grey blob for proper stinkers, 0.19%. They were quite serious about scores at N64 Mag, weren't they? Talking about playing games to the end, making sure you got your money's worth, especially with those expensive N64 carts. They weren't handing out star badges lightly. Sounds like they took their reviewing job seriously, even if sometimes they maybe got a bit carried away with the hype. This page of the N64 magazine, bless it, is a bit of a mixed bag really. At the top it's shouting about Tetrisphere going 3D, calling it magic even. Bit much, but Tetris in 3D was a novelty back then. Then there's Cruisin' USA, something they're having PAL region issues with, telling us to flip to page 42 to see what's up. Probably something to do with dodgy conversions, those were the days. Next up is Import Arena, which sounds fancy. It's highlighting games from America and Japan, naming SimCity 2000, asking about buildings, trees and water pipes in 64-bit. SimCity on the 64, who'd have thought it? They also mention Pachinko World 64, calling it absolutely awful but Japanese style. Ouch. Apparently page 47 has the gory details. Gee. Below that, How It Works explains their rating categories. Visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, and then a verdict. Pretty standard review stuff, giving each a score out of 9. They're trying to sound scientific about the verdict score, saying it's about how much fun a game is. Right. Then there's Team 64, which is basically what the reviewers are thinking. James Ashton, who's become editor apparently, is going full Darth Vader with cold-hearted ruthlessness. Dramatic. His game of the month is Weetrix. Will Overton refused to comment on his Destiny, and begrudgingly admitted to liking Holy Magic Centurion as his game of the month. Tim Weaver's been silenced this month because he overused the word bear, apparently in his FIFA 98 review. Poor Tim. Andrea Ball is raving about Cruisin' USA, and how it's her game of the month, promising to hit James very hard with it. Sounds a bit intense. On the right, Paul Jarrell just wants to win at any game, bless him, and his game of the month is Pachinko. Jess Bickham seems pleased that Barbie Girl and Dr. Jones are doing well, whatever that means, and his game of the month is Fighter's Destiny. Lastly, James Price, the new boy, is welcomed aboard, and his game of the month is SimCity 2000. Right at the bottom there's a U section. They're looking for a new writer, asking for CVs and writing samples. Deadline was the 13th of March. Hope someone applied. Game of the month for that section is TBA. Very mysterious. Overall a typical page really. Bit of everything crammed in there, from game previews and reviews to staff banter. Standard N64 Mag fare from back in the day. This page is an advert for Fighter's Destiny. In the N64 Arena section, looks like it's issue 13. It's got that rather dramatic text at the top. Crack open the champers and get yourself ready. We've been owed this fateful meeting for a long time. Bit much, isn't it? It's just a fighting game, not the second coming. There's a picture of a bloke who looks a bit like someone tried to make Ryu from Street Fighter, but forgot how to draw faces properly. All angular and shiny. He's giving it the old come on then stare. Then you've got the little box of info for Fighter's Destiny, published by Ocean. Says it needs 96 meg of memory, which was probably quite a lot back then, and it's 1 to 2 players. Right underneath it says out now with a Union Jack flag, so it's definitely out in Blighty. It uses the controller pack but not the Rumble pack, which is a bit of a shame. Rumble was always good fun, even if it was a bit of a gimmick. And blimey, £60. That's a fair whack for a game. Even for the N64 you could get a few rounds down the pub for that much. The title of the game, Fighter's Destiny, is plastered in big yellow letters at the bottom, just in case you missed it. So yeah, looks like they're trying to get everyone excited about this new beat-em-up, Fighter's Destiny. Let's see if it lives up to the hype, shall we? This page shows a review of Fighter's Destiny in N64 Magazine. You've got some screenshots from the game taking up most of the page, showing characters like Ryuji and Mei Ling battling it out. Looks like your typical polygonal fighters of the time, you know, like Virtua Fighter or Tekken, except maybe a bit more colourful. There's another screenshot with Tomahawk and Ninja, so you get the idea of the roster. They're going on about fighting games in general at the start of the article, saying they're dead common these days, which was certainly true back then. Arcades and consoles were full of them. The reviewer is mentioning it's tricky to find someone who doesn't own a beat-em-up on Saturn, PlayStation or even the SNES, stretching it a bit there mate. SNES was getting on a bit by 98. They reckon Fighter's Destiny has a charmingly violent vibe and plenty of chopsocky fun, which is what we were all after, wasn't it? They mention N64 might finally be getting in on the act with fighting games, after Sega and Sony had been dominating with Virtua Fighter and Tekken. Bit of a latecomer to the party, the N64, in that respect. There are little boxes with comments dotted around the page. One mentions a hidden cuddle combo in the commands list. Another quotes Tim Weaver calling a move a hairy monkey ass attack. Charming. And another box highlights the point system, which they seem to think is a big deal in this game. Apparently you can win by knockdown, counter, ring out, or special moves. Trying to be a bit different, are they? Accurate. Overall it looks like they're cautiously optimistic about Fighter's destiny, trying to build a bit of hype, seeing if the N64 can finally get a decent fighting game to compete with the PlayStation and Saturn titans. We were all hoping for a decent beat-em-up on the N64, weren't we? Let's see if this one was any good then. This page depicts an article from N64 Magazine, issue 13. Looks like they're having a go at a game called Fighter's Destiny. It's got a very dramatic title, The Way of the Warrior. Which is a bit much, isn't it? They're banging on about how this fighting game is different, because instead of just battering the health bar down, you're racking up points. Apparently the energy bars are always recharging, so it's all about scoring points. And you need to get your opponent in a Fiore condition. That's when they're dazed with stars circling their head. Sounds a bit silly, doesn't it? They've broken down the point system into different moves. A ring out is worth a point, which is just booting someone off the edge of the arena. Classic cheap tactic that. Throwing gets you 2 points, and they mention a move called Inashi to set it up. Knockdowns are worth 3 points, and apparently every character's got a knockdown move, so that's fair enough. Counters also get you 3 points, for being clever and breaking an attack. Then there's Judge, which is a point if time runs out and you've had the upper hand. A bit like points for artistic impression, I suppose. And finally, Specials are the big hitters at 4 points, described as a blimming pretty sight, a multicolored explosion, always good to have a bit of visual flair. They also mention the game modes. There's Survival, Fastest, and Rodeo. Rodeo sounds properly bonkers. Apparently you're fighting a giant cow called USHI. Right then. Sounds like typical N64 Magazine. A bit of a laugh, trying to make sense of whatever odd game they've been sent this month. This page from a retro N64 magazine, must be from around March 1998 going by the date at the bottom, is all about the fighting game. Fighter's Destiny. Wasn't that a bit of a hidden gem at the time? It's got a slightly odd control system apparently, only using 2 face buttons for moves, A and B for lower and upper attacks, with the D-pad for movement. The reviewer, Zai I guess they called him, thought the D-pad was better than the stick for this game. More frantic pad thrashing action. They mentioned shoulder buttons for 3D sidestepping, and they were really pushing this Shaolin Buddha finger, my son move. Sounds a bit silly, doesn't it? There's a section showing a free sample throw move called Inashi and then Screwdriver, which they say will get you 2 points, playing as Ryuji against poor old Robert, the robot they like to beat up in training. They reckon Robert is an idiot robot, bless him. It also talks about the training mode, which has sections for normal practice, aerial moves, special moves for getting fatality points. Bit cheeky calling them fatalities when it's not Mortal Kombat, is it? And escape training. Apparently there's a clown character called Pierre who throws custard pies, which is just the sort of thing you got in fighting games back then. Wasn't it all a bit bonkers? They finish off by saying you need to learn all the moves, for you must win. Bit dramatic. This page depicts a feature from N64 Magazine. Looks like they are previewing Fighter's Destiny on the N64. Remember that one? It was a bit different, wasn't it? Not your standard beat-em-up, more of a GR Applefest I recall. The article is called A Bit Handy on the Cobbles, which is a bit of alright British slang, talking about being good at fighting basically. They're introducing 6 of the 10 characters you can initially pick from, each with their own style and difficulty level. First up is Ryuji, the Japanese fella, described as an all-rounder, a bit like Ryu from Street Fighter it says. Cheeky comparison that. Everyone was trying to be Street Fighter back then. His special move is the Mach Fist. Then there's Abdul from Mongolia, another all-rounder. Apparently he developed his fighting style to deal with school bullies, bless him. His move of choice is the Fireball. Next is Tomahawk, the American character, a powerful type. They go on about him liking apple pie and having a haze of cigarette smoke about him. Bit stereotypical, eh? His move is the Lariat. After that there's Mealing, the Chinese character. She's quick. Apparently she was raised by cheetahs. A bit far-fetched even for a fighting game, isn't it? Her move is the Spiral Jump. Then comes Ninja, described as skillful. Turns out he's not actually a ninja at all, just a bloke in a ninja outfit from Solihull, of all places. His special move is Curse Palm. Finally there's Pierre from France, the tricky character. He's a clown, poor sod, apparently became one after getting bullied. His move is the Very Mysterious Dance. They really went all out with the character types in this game, didn't they? Root. There's a little box out section about secret characters too, saying there are 4 of them and that you can unlock a mysterious boss character called the Joker, and even a cow called Ushi if you crack the Master Challenge mode. A cow really? Still, it's all a bit of fun I suppose, typical N64 silliness from back in the day. This page depicts a look at Fighter's Destiny on the N64. It's got profiles of some of the fighters you can pick from, like Leon, who apparently is made of porridge, bit of a weird one. Then there's Bob, a reverse vampire from Brazil, which sounds like a load of old cobblers, and Valerie, a German lass who took up fighting after getting stressed about loan repayments. Relatable stuff. Lastly, there's Borro, who's Swiss, and seems a bit of an oddball, rambling about sci-fi and Kit Pedler. Each character has a nationality, a fighting style, a bit of flavor text, and a move of choice listed, so you know what you're getting. There's a select your player screenshot, showing the roster of characters you can choose from. Then there's a section called Surprise, which tells you that beating the single-player game isn't the end of it in Fighter's Destiny. Fancy that? Apparently your character gets a new special move, and you get to enter the Master Challenge. The Master Challenge bit explains it's a randomly generated bunch of fights against either the Master or Joker characters, out of a possible 12. If you beat the Master, you get new skills, but if you lose to him, he nicks your skills. Sounds a bit cheeky. And if you fight the Joker, he's supposed to be really hard, and can make you lose your newly learned skills even faster than GoldenEye flew off the shelves, which is saying something back then. Taida. So to summarize, you can either carry on trusting yourself to get through the Master Challenge and earn all the moves, or save your powered-up fighter in a controller pack, just in case you get rinsed by the Joker and lose all your new skills. Seems like a bit of a grind to get everything, but that's how they made games last longer in those days, wasn't it? This page is a review from N64 Magazine, looks like issue 13, from back in '98, about Fighter's Destiny on the N64. They seem pretty chuffed with it, giving it an 86% score, reckon it's a good fighting game, even saying it could banish the memory of Mortal Kombat trilogy, which is a bold statement. They call it inventive and superlative, so they're definitely impressed. The review kicks off talking about how they've had to wade through some dodgy fighting games before getting to this one, name-dropping Clay Fighter, War Gods, Mace, The Dark Age, Dual Heroes, and Art of Fighting. Sounds like they weren't too keen on those, mentioning headaches and chronic depression. A bit dramatic, eh? They were obviously hoping for something decent on the N64 in the fighting genre. Fighter's Destiny itself, they seem to like the visuals, calling them meaty, colourful and smooth. Sounds are decent too, toe-tapping tunes and crunchy effects, though the commentator is apparently a bit too American, which is a classic complaint back then. Mastery and Lifespan are both rated 7 and 8 respectively, suggesting it's got depth and will keep you going. They mention the ring-out recovery system where you can grab the edge if knocked out, and the Master Challenge mode where you can gain new skills and save them to a controller pack, which was a big deal back then, memory cards and all that. They reckon it adds to the lifespan and gives you an incentive to finish the game. There are screenshots dotted about. One shows Ryuji fighting Bob, and another with Ninja vs Borro, and then another with Abdul fighting Valerie. They've got these little speech bubbles with sarcastic comments. One says, "This is what happens if you swear too much. Just ask Tim." Another says, "You too can have your very own Discoonafist with Fighter's Destiny." And, "Never wear leggings like this with an audience of 20,000. Bit cheeky. There's also a down one-handed backbreaker move, shown with a special effect. The reviewer, Jess Bickham, pronounced Jess Bickham, concludes by saying it's like the N64's Tekken, praising the graphics, moves, and combat system. They're happy with it and reckon it's the best fighting game on the N64 at the time, saying it restores their faith and they'll sleep well tonight. All in all, they're pretty positive about Fighter's Destiny. Seems like it was a decent brawler for the N64 back in the day. This page is a review of Tetrasphere for the N64, right in the middle of issue 13, March 1998 of N64 Magazine. It's headlined Tetrasphere, in big orange letters, can't miss it. The reviewer, ZY, starts off saying it's a game they'd been waiting for, a puzzle game where you drop blocks onto a sphere. Sounds a bit odd at first, doesn't it? There are a few screenshots, one showing a rescue mode, another with core mode, and another called multi. They all look quite colourful, and a bit abstract. You can see the blocks on the spheres. The simple aim of the game, apparently, is to reveal the glowing core by removing bricks. There are also some tips boxes, one saying there are many ways to increase your X count, and another mentioning gravity combos. Another tip mentions the magic rocket and magnet to clear spheres. It mentions that Tetrasphere is from Nintendo and H2O, and was 40 quid back then. Ouch, games were pricey, weren't they? They say it's ironic that one of the best known video game genres came from the USSR, referring to Tetris of course. It says Tetrasphere is inspired by games like Columns, Dr. Mario, Puyo Puyo and Puzzle Bobble, so it's in good company then, Joss. The reviewer talks about the music, saying there's a wealth of audio squeezed onto the cartridge, with loads of tracks from hardcore to ambient trance, even some secret ones. Apparently the music is good but a bit odd for a puzzle game. They list some track names, a bit pretentious some of them, like Perpetuate 303 and Compliant Confuse. What's wrong with track 1, track 2 feet, eh? They also mention other track names like Flim Flam, Manic Drummix, Hallucid, Phony, T-Gray, Learn, Zip Zip, Extol, Azure Lux, Martist and Phase. Jess Sinju. Overall, it sounds like a decent puzzle game, a bit different from your usual Tetris, but maybe worth a look if you were into that sort of thing. They seem to think it's alright, not overly hyped, but certainly not slating it. This page is about a game called Tetrisphere for the N64, looks like it's a review, and then some, is the title at the top. Sounds a bit like the magazine is trying to be clever, doesn't it? There are different sections breaking down the game, like multi, hide and seek, puzzle and bots. The multi-section is about multiplayer mode, with a screenshot showing 2 spheres. Looks a bit confusing, to be honest. Then, hide and seek sounds like a variation on the main game, something about catching bots in bubbles. Puzzle mode is described as having 100 set-piece puzzles, which sounds like it could be a good challenge. They mention you have to remove all the blocks in each one with limited moves. There's a bit about bots. Apparently there are 7 different ones like gear, wheels, gyro, stomp, turbine, jack and rocket. Each one has different speed and power apparently, but the reviewer, Steve Jarrett, admits he doesn't really know what their traits are. Bit of an oversight that, in it? Nah. The main part of the text describes how you destroy blocks by dropping pieces onto a sphere. It talks about combos and getting rid of similarly shaped and colored blocks. It mentions magic items like a rocket and a magnet, which sounds a bit odd for Tetris, doesn't it? Apparently if you mess up you get a skull. Nice touch. The graphics are called exceptionally handsome but not terribly thrilling, which is a very British way of putting it, isn't it? That's a sphere alright. Haha. Sounds are alright apparently, depends if you like manic techno and ambient dance tracks, which was the stuff back then, wasn't it? Mastery and Lifespan are both rated 6, meaning it's alright. You could play it on PlayStation 2, but it would look somewhat dismal in comparison. Cheeky. Lifespan is described as one of those games you come back to after months. Good lifespan enhancing options too. The verdict is Major League Weird and it gets a score of 69%, which is okay then, not amazing, not terrible. They say it turns your brain to shower gel, and the 2-player mode isn't as good as beat-em-ups or racing games, which is probably fair enough. Overall sounds like a decent puzzle game, a bit different, maybe worth a rent from Blockbuster if you were bored of Mario. This page depicts a review of Cruisin' USA from back in the day, issue 13 of N64 Magazine it was. Crikey, 1998, seems like donkey's years ago now. It's not exactly a glowing review, is it? Cruisin' USA's back. Hello, anyone? The headline screams, setting the tone right away. There's a big, fat 24% slapped on it, and the verdict calls it a grade Z stinker. Ouch. Seems like ZY, or Zai as we were supposed to say, was not a fan. Looking at the screenshots, you can see what they mean. Golden Gate Bridge popping out of nowhere, blurry textures, and cars that look a bit like cardboard boxes. They even point out a car sparking up, like a dodgy firework. The reviewer is really laying into the visuals, calling them ludicrous paper-thin scenery and badly drawn cars, proper harsh. Sounds get a kicking too. Awful music apparently, like some terrible first gig. Mastery and Lifespan are also slated. Poor visuals, inept handling, and a truly loathsome course layout. Not pulling any punches, are they? Lifespan is deemed only slightly longer than an episode of EastEnders, which is a bit brutal, even for games back then. They're comparing it to Top Gear Rally and Colin McRae Rally, saying Cruisin' USA makes them look amazing, and even Maureen from Driving School gets a mention, making Cruisin' look worse than that. They talk about crashing into school buses and fuel tankers. Fuel schmankers apparently, bit of a weird word that, and veering about like you're driving a boat, not a car. Sounds like a right old mess. Warrington Dorcas. The reviewer reckons the tracks are awful and samey, reckons they finished it in half an hour. 35 quid it was back then, mind you. Oof, wouldn't have been happy paying that for this, would you? Certainly not with proper racers like TGR and MRC around at the time. Small mercies, eh? Tim Weaver signs off at the end, looks like he was having a right laugh at its expense. This page from issue 13 of N64 Magazine, it's got this import arena section, right? Always had a look to see what was coming over from Japan and the US. This time it's all about SimCity 2000 for the N64. Remember SimCity? Proper classic PC game. Never thought I'd see it on a console really, especially the N64, but there you go. All about 2004, remember 6? The review is talking about how Nintendo's own city builder might overshadow it, but reckons Imagineer's SimCity will help kill time. Fair enough. They're calling it a God game, which is a bit dramatic, but I guess you are playing God of your own little city. The review itself seems a bit tongue-in-cheek, talking about UK news and corruption, then joking that SimCity is the solution. Build a power station and ignore everyone. Typical magazine humor from back then, eh? May News. There's a screen grab of the game. Looks like a city under construction with those isometric graphics, very 90s. Another screenshot shows some news report thing in the game. Apparently they are tricky to understand. And another one showing some waterfront development. Looks alright for an N64 port of a PC game. Sherrington? They've got a little info box about SimCity 2000 saying it's out now in Japan but TBA for the UK and US. 64 megs, which was a big deal back then for a cartridge. And it's a one-player game. Says it's going to cost about £30, which wasn't cheap but not crazy money either for a new game import. The reviewer is called ZY, or Zai as they are helpfully saying how to pronounce it. Always with the weird names in these mags. Overall, it's a look at SimCity 2000, a bit of nostalgia for PC gamers wondering if it'll work on the N64. Seems decent enough if you're into that sort of thing. This page depicts an article from a retro gaming magazine. Looks like it's about SimCity 2000 on the N64. Right then, let's have a butcher's at what they're saying here. Führer. It's titled Evolution of a City, and it's broken down into 5 basic bits of city building advice for SimCity 2000. Starting with the basics power, naturally. They're having a bit of a laugh about choosing eco-friendly hydroplants versus polluting coal or even nuclear. Joking about two-headed pets and meltdowns. Typical magazine humor back then. They point out green squares mean residential zones, but you need power and water, obviously. Section 2 is water. Water everywhere. Water is as important as power, apparently a test of morals even. They talk about being a scrupulous mayor and building desalination plants and all that jazz. Apparently if you don't sort out water your citizens will moan, and the reviewer, Zai, reckons his mother thinks he's stupid, which is a bit harsh. Laying the pipes of peace is next, talking about actually getting the water to the people, not just having a water plant. Underground pipes and all that. They moan a bit about it being tedious, more like work than fun, but mention it might lead to interesting scenarios, like the water being cut off in a part of town sounds like a right laugh, not. Apparently Zai has got maths homework to do instead, sounds more appealing to be honest. Mamachati. Then it's the Industrial Revolution, number 4. Jobs are important, who knew? Unemployment and crime if you don't build factories, apparently. They're talking about light and dense industry, petrol stations versus factories, and mentioning pollution is a undesirable side effect. Factories away from houses, roads and trains to connect them, basic city planning stuff really. But they mention traffic congestion, which is always a pain in SimCity. Finally, the importance of firemen. Right, disasters. They suggest turning them off to make it easier, unless you're a masochist. Earthquakes, fires, monsters from space, the usual SimCity chaos. Saying disasters can make it a puzzle game. I suppose it can. They then joke about meticulously planned power grids going up in smoke because of a tornado. Bit dramatic, lads. Monster scroke. So, overall, it's a basic guide to starting out in SimCity 2000, with a bit of humor thrown in like they did back then. It's all pretty straightforward stuff if you've played SimCity before. It reminds you of when games were a bit less hand-holdy, and you actually had to figure things out for yourself, eh? This page is from an old N64 magazine, back from '98 it seems, and it's all about SimCity 2000 on the N64. Blimey, SimCity on a console, who'd have thought it? The page is titled Create a Landscape and shows screenshots of the game, looking rather blocky, as you'd expect. They're banging on about how you can muck about with the terrain, raise hills, dig rivers, that sort of thing. It says you can adjust trees and hills are expensive apparently, which is a bit like real life in it. They even mention you can eventually leave Earth and start a new city on another planet. Bit ambitious for a city builder, wasn't it? And then also has Mei. There's a big section called accessibility, which is a bit confusing, saying even if you've played it before it's a struggle. Maybe they mean the Japanese version is hard to understand. Ah yes, it does mention later on that the Japanese version is incomprehensible unless you've already played it, and that the citizens' requests are easy to ignore because they're in Japanese. Classic cast. There are sections breaking down the game like visuals saying it's isometric 3D, which was the style back then, and different sprites for buildings. Sounds gets a right kicking, saying, nothing special whatsoever, with burps, whistles and jarring soundtrack. Ouch. Mastery reckons the PC version was years ahead, and the Saturn version was rubbish. Nice. Lifespan claims it's the kind of game you can play for months. Well, maybe if you had nothing else to do. Worry. The verdict is actually quite positive, calling it the best strategy game on the N64, mainly because there wasn't much else in that genre on the system at the time, I suppose. They say arcade fans should steer clear, which is fair enough. It got a score of 83%, which is pretty decent. Overall, it's a review saying SimCity 2000 on the N64 is alright if you're into that sort of thing and haven't got a PC. Not exactly going wild about it, but not slagging it off either. Just a solid, if slightly dated, city builder for the N64. This page from N64 Magazine, right, it's a review of Pachinko World 64. Blimey, who asked for that? It's under Import Arena, which tells you all you need to know, right? Japanese oddness, Joe. The reviewer, Tim Weaver, he seems as baffled as anyone why this game exists. He describes Pachinko as a bit like pinball, but without flippers and all the fun bits. Apparently you just keep turning a knob and watch steel balls fall down. Thrilling. Dorin, there are screenshots showing the inside of a virtual Pachinko hall. Looks a bit drab and repetitive, all these digital machines lined up. One shot has a display showing 123. Very exciting stuff. Another one shows a kind of map, I suppose, to navigate this virtual hall. They even point out nice people in the halls, which is probably taking the mickey. The review scores are hilarious. Accessibility is a big fat 0. Visuals get a 1, sounds a 3, and mastery also gets a 0. Lifespan gets a 1, and the overall verdict is a 12% score. Ouch. Absolute tripe, he calls it, and says it's an experiment to see if monkeys can use computers. Charming. He does admit that at least the Mahjong games on the N64 were competently programmed, which is a backhanded compliment if ever I heard one. There's a little box on the side saying accessibility with the Japanese and British flags, and it says nope. No chance. Sums it up really. Under visuals, it says abominably lethargic, and pop-up, and something about traveling less than half a mile an hour in the game. Sounds like a right laugh riot. The sounds are described as acceptable Jap keyboard tinkering. Acceptable, if you're listening to the radio apparently. And mastery? Take a guess. Oh, go on you wag. Cheeky sod. Lifespan is drop all your money in, watch all the balls drop, die. Grim. Honestly, reading this makes you wonder what they were thinking bringing this over. Weird Japanese games, eh? Still, it's a laugh reading about how bad it is. 12%, classic. This page is all about celebrating the N64's first birthday in the UK. Can you believe it's been a year already? It's March 1998, and they're asking readers to vote for the greatest N64 game so far. They mention that it feels like only yesterday we were all ripping open the boxes of our new consoles and eagerly playing Super Mario 64, Pilotwings 64, Turok, and Shadows of the Empire. Ah, those were the days. Warrington door. The big headline in massive yellow bubble writing is Happy Birthday N64, so you can't miss that. There's also a bit at the top about pulling party poppers and cutting cake. Bit cheesy, but what do you expect? Below the text, there are some deflated balloon illustrations, probably to reinforce the party theme. On the right-hand side, there's a Where You'll Find Everything box, pointing you to different features in the magazine. It mentions how to vote for your favorite N64 games on page 50, the official N64 Magazine Top 20 games on page 52, an exclusive interview with Rare on page 56. Now that's something I'd have been interested in back then. There's also something about the N64 Magazine Readers Awards 1998 on page 61, a GoldenEye Spy Master competition on page 62, a Skill Club 64 on page 66, how to launch a successful N64 magazine on page 70, and a preview of 1998 the year ahead on page 72. Seems like they've packed this issue full of stuff to celebrate the birthday. And right at the bottom it says March 1998, and N64 issue 49, not issue 13 as the description said. Maybe someone misremembered. Anyway, a lot of content crammed onto one page, just like magazines were back then. This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's about how they went about voting for the top 20 N64 games. It's got this slightly over-the-top description of a gothic Victorian office block, where they've locked themselves away to argue about games. Proper serious business back then. They've got all the essentials for a long night. Round table, food, drink, even a sink and fridge unit, you know, for maximum game deliberation efficiency. Apparently, they got together at 5 o'clock, and were locked in until they picked the top 20 games. Sounds a bit dramatic, but that's magazines for you. They had a 29-inch Sony Trinitron to play the games on, which was pretty swanky at the time, and they were using the N64 Magazine catalogue itself as a guide. There's a bit in the picture captions, one about James suggesting using a Lamborghini game to prop up a table, which sounds like classic blokish magazine banter. And another caption mentions James and Tim having a quiet disagreement about how good Diddy Kong Racing is. Diddy Kong Racing, yeah, that was alright, not Mario Kart good, but decent enough. Warrington Norsa. Looks like they took this whole best games thing pretty seriously, trying to find the best N64 game very official. They're going to pick 20 games to go to the final voting process, and then whittle it down to a top 10. A proper marathon session deciding what's what on the N64. Simpler times. This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's charting a day in the office, or at least the day they picked the top 20 N64 games. Must have been a long day by the looks of it. They start off pretty jovial with celebratory cokes, but then get straight into the nitty-gritty, sifting through the real stinkers, games that scored less than 50%. And blimey, some of those names bring back memories for all the wrong reasons. FIFA 64, always a clunky mess on the 64, Mortal Kombat Trilogy, Clay Fighter 63 1/3, and Cruisin' USA, yeah, we tried to like them, didn't we? Power League 64, and Wheel of Fortune getting a look in is a bit desperate though, and MK Mythologies, oh dear, that's a painful one to recall. There's a bit of office banter about hiding an aero gauge. Anyone remember that game? Didn't set the world on fire. Then Bomberman 64 comes out for multiplayer, and someone gets a bit weepy about Super Bomberman 2 on the SNES, bless 'em. Arguments already breaking out. NBA Hangtime gets a kicking too, apparently no one wants to play that. And a whole heap of other games get binned in record time. Aero Fighters Assault, Doraemon, bunch of J-League sports games, no takers for any of them, 10 minutes of pure boredom. Lunch break with tea and sandwiches, even arguments about peanut butter sandwiches, classic. Someone tries to suggest Mahjong, and rightly gets shot down. Then they're back at it, still rejecting games like Tetrisphere, WCW/NWO, Wonder Project J2, F1 Grand Prix gets a road test, and someone's making a passionate plea for Killer Instinct, which apparently Zai, pronounced Zai remember, thought was a bit harsh in the mag, but it gets in anyway, no objections. Doom 64 is the first game to get nominated for the top 20, which makes sense, proper scary game back then. Paul's apparently scared of the monsters in it. Someone trips over the aero gauge cart hidden under the carpet, clumsy sod. Then they're debating Shadows of the Empire. James is not keen, seems he's been scarred by having to write about it for months, wants to get home. Dark Rift and Wayne Gretzky's game get a mention, apparently the latter can make people swear, and Chameleon Twist, now that's a weird one, apparently that's the only game to make someone swear, that's saying something. Lamborghini brings back bad memories for someone, Tamagotchi World 64 of all things is mentioned, and then a bunch of other games get considered. Gotch World 64, Art of Fighting Twin, Robotron, Wild Chopper, Coke gets spilled, and the aero gauge falls out again. Then it's decision time, and they realize they've accidentally included 32 games when they were only meant to pick 20. So they have to cut even more, listing a load of games that are automatically in because they scored between 50 and 80%. Chameleon Twist, Wild Choppers, Killer Instinct, Robotron 64, Mace, Goemon, Wayne Gretzky, and loads more. A real mix. Then there's a big cull. They eliminate a bunch, including some of those that were automatically in like Chameleon Twist and Killer Instinct, plus Wayne Gretzky and Shadows of the Empire again, poor game. Finally they get to voting. Top 10 games, point system, everyone has to vote, tension mounting as it gets put into a spreadsheet. And then, after all that, the N64 Magazine Top 10 is decided. Everyone's knackered, games everywhere, mysterious sandwich stains, sounds like a right state, bed calls. On the left there's a picture of some of them looking at game carts, and a caption that mentions Doom being scary and someone getting killed in the game. Probably sums up the mood of the day quite well. Looks like a proper marathon gaming session to pick those top 20. This page from N64 Magazine is counting down their top 20 games. It's for the N64 of course, so it's proper retro stuff now in it. They've got Turok, Dinosaur Hunter at number 10, from issue 1, 91% apparently, with 17 votes cast. Back then, Turok was a big deal. Dinosaurs were always cool, and seeing them on the telly in 3D, well, it was something else for a console. They reckon it saved acclaim, a bit dramatic maybe, but it was a decent game. The reviewer ZY seems to like it, saying IAMTURROKKK, and calls it ludicrously violent, marvelously entertaining. Yeah, it was alright for blasting dinos. At number 9 is Yoshi's Story from issue 12, with 86% and 23 votes. Bit surprised this is so high to be honest, it's a bit kiddyish isn't it? Graphical majesty they call it, bit much. They say it's a 2D platformer, not much you haven't seen before. They do mention the super happy tree, which, yeah, sounds about right for Yoshi. Apparently they wanted to hold a Yoshi up against the wall and shoot it. A bit dark for a Yoshi game review, eh? Then there's a section called Bubbling Under, for games that didn't quite make the top 10, but were still liked. Number 20 is Fighter's Destiny, issue 13, 86%. They say it's not the classic beat-em-up, but the closest they've got on the N64. Innovative little number, they call it. Yeah, it was a bit different, I suppose. Rumeli. Number 19 is Duke Nukem 64, issue 10, 85%. Elderly PC clone. A bit harsh, but yeah, it was a PC game first, wasn't it? 4-player Duke on the N64 was a laugh though, even if censorship had withered Mr. Nukem. Yeah, a bit toned down compared to the PC version, weren't they all back then on console? Warrington. Number 18 is Madden 64, issue 10, 92%. Best version of the game so far. American football never really took off here, did it? But they say it can be really fun. Max apparently was reluctantly persuaded. Each to their own, I suppose. Number 17 is Top Gear Rally, issue 8, 86%. Nearest the N64 has to a proper driving simulation. Sega Rally was good, so yeah, I guess. Boasts the best car dynamics, and some disappointingly bland tracks. Sounds about right for Top Gear games of that era. Lastly, at number 16 is Tamagotchi World, issue 13, 79%. Rogue entry definitely is that. Tamagotchis were massive then, weren't they? They reckon it shows democracy is a dangerous tool, because it's in the chart. Bit of a joke entry, I think. So yeah, that's the page, a snapshot of what they were rating on the N64 back in '98. Bit of nostalgia, alright? This page showcases the reader's top N64 games from what must have been around March 1998, judging by the date at the bottom there. Right at the top we've got Diddy Kong Racing at number 8, getting a decent 90% score from issue 10. They reckon it was a bit of a surprise hit from Nintendo, especially as those clever chaps at Rare from over here were involved, though they still don't rate it quite as highly as Mario Kart 64, which is a fair point, mind you. The screenshot shows some of that Dark Moon Caverns level, looked quite swish at the time. Coming in at number 7 is Blast Corps, with 88% from issue 5. Apparently it's a bit of a unique one, especially because Rare made it here in the UK, which was a bit unusual when everyone else seemed to be copying Japanese games. They admit you can see all the levels a bit too easily, which is a fair cop, but the medal system keeps you going back. The picture has those bulldozer robots doing their thing in a city. Sliding into number 6 is International Superstar Soccer 64, with a stonking 92% from issue 3. They're calling it the best footy game on any computer, even better than PlayStation or Saturn, which is fighting talk. They're banging on about the graphics and how the football flows, and that the computer is always tough to beat, even on harder settings. Good for a laugh with a few mates by the sounds of it. There's a typical in-game footy scene to show it off. Down in the lower ranks at 15, we have Mischief Makers, with 90% from issue 8. It seems a bit bonkers and maybe misunderstood, but they think it should have been more popular. The screenshot looks very retro-spritey, which was Treasure's style. Number 14 is Osumo 64, also 90% from issue 11. Apparently Max was really keen on this one and helped push it up the charts. They say it's a bit strange and there were PAL conversion issues. The picture is of some chunky sumo wrestlers. Then at number 13 it's Puyo Puyo 64, on 80% from issue 10. Andrea seems to like this one, calling it a good retro sort of game, but only 13th best overall. Looks like one of those puzzle games with cute characters. And finally, tied at number 11 are Snowbow Kids and Wave Race 64, both on 88% and from issue 11 and 2 respectively. Snowbow Kids is supposedly great, especially for multiplayer and a rival to Mario Kart, though maybe not quite as engaging, despite being made by Atlas. Wave Race 64 they say was a big shock early on and is still great, but Team 64 don't love it as much, putting it just outside the top 10. Technically advanced compared to Snowbow Kids perhaps, but still not quite as gripping. Both screenshots show in-game action, one with snowboarding and the other with jet skis. It's all about voting for your favorite 20 games apparently, so quite the popularity contest back then. This page covers a couple of cracking N64 titles, doesn't it? First up at number 4 we've got Pilot Wings 64. Seems they gave it a respectable 89% back in issue 1, with 38 votes cast. Looking at the screenshots, yeah, that hang glider bit was a right pain sometimes, wasn't it? Caused a few palpitations, I recall. They're chatting about it being surprisingly good considering it's not all guns blazing like other games, saying it's relaxing but still a proper challenge. ZY, or Zai as they pronounce it, seems to be quite taken with it, reckons it's a breathtaking showcase for the N64, and that Nintendo delivered on their promise. Fair enough, it was a decent launch title. Then flipping over, at number 5 we've got Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as some of us know it. This one got a stonking 94% and 90% across issue 3 and 8, and 35 votes, so it was clearly a hit. The screenshots show Peppy Rabbit, and some sort of boss going at it. They're bigging it up as a proper cinematic experience, comparing it to an 80-minute sci-fi film, which is a bit much, but you get the idea. Mentioning copyright rules, as you do, they also touch on how it changed things up from Yoshi's Story, with its level selection stuff. The reviewer is proper buzzing about Star Fox 64, calling it brilliant and eye-boggling and all that. Yeah, it was good, can't deny it. Solid page of nostalgia, right there. This page from an old N64 mag, probably issue 13 from March 98 going by the corner, is all about the top N64 games as voted by the readers. It's got Mario Kart 64 at number 3, and Super Mario 64 at number 2, foray. Mario Kart 64 is causing a bit of a stir at number 3 apparently. ZY, the reviewer, is having none of the too easy single player, and not as good as the SNES version criticisms. Remember all that? Seemed like everyone was comparing everything to the SNES back then. He's saying Mario Kart 64 is brilliant for 4-player, especially those office time trial battles on Mario Raceway. Good times. There's a funny little caption with Donkey Kong being called too fat and ugly, cheeky, and another one about Wario Stadium being the office multiplayer track, eat my exhaust. Classic banter. Icky as a poo and is you startin' are the they say we say bits for Mario Kart. Very childish, but that's mags for you back then. Come on then, we'll take you all on, is the proper gamer response. Fair enough. Then, Super Mario 64 at number 2, apparently a travesty according to ZY, it should be number 1 obviously. He's going on about it being a lesson in game design, the 3D world, and how perfectly controlled it all is. Bit strong, but yeah, Mario 64 was amazing back then, properly blew your mind. He does concede that Pilotwings might be someone's personal number 1, which is fair. Pilotwings 64 was pretty good. So longer dear Bowser, is there they say quote. And Swahili holds the only word to sum it up. Super Mario 64 is absolutely sufufum, is there we say. Sufufum? Right then, still, 2 cracking games topping the charts there, good times on the N64. This page right then, it's all about GoldenEye 007 being crowned Game of the Year in N64 Magazine. Bit of a no-brainer really, wasn't it? They're having to justify themselves for picking it over what they previously thought was the best game in the world, which you can only assume was Mario 64, bless it. Apparently, the reviewer, ZY, or Zai as they say, reckons GoldenEye just edges it out, and they go into a few reasons why. Firstly, and pretty obviously, it's Bond. James Bond. Who didn't want to be Bond back then? They say it lets you be Bond in an adventure worthy of him, which is a fair point. Secondly, they talk about the techie stuff, saying Rare really pulled it out of the bag with the visuals and detail. Bullet holes, smashable glass, all that jazz. They go on about the multiplayer deathmatch, saying it wipes the floor with Duke Nukem and Hexen on the PC. Bit strong maybe, but it was good fun, I'll give them that. They also make a point that it's easy to pick up and play, which is true, even your nan could have a go, probably. And finally, they're quite impressed that it was made by a team that wasn't super experienced. Which, looking back, is quite something, isn't it? They're properly raving about how good the team at Rare must be, and what they could do in the future. Bit over the top perhaps, but hey, it was a great game, and they were clearly chuffed with it. They even have a little, they say we say, bit at the bottom, bit of a laugh, ending with, buy this game. That's all there is to it. Can't argue with that really. Pretty much sums up how everyone felt at the time, didn't it? This page depicts an interview with Rare, those secretive chaps from deepest Warwickshire. It seems Nintendo did all the PR for them back in the day. It's all about GoldenEye 007 for the N64, which was a pretty big deal at the time, wasn't it? Norsa? The interview is titled, The Rare Essentials, Rare, GoldenEye 007. They're chatting about how GoldenEye came to be, and getting all 9 members of the GoldenEye team together for the interview. It sounds like it was a joint decision between Rare and Nintendo to make the game, although Rare had the idea first. They mention it was a bit unusual for Nintendo to take on a license like that. They talk about being fans of the Bond films, and when asked about Pierce Brosnan they reckon he's the best Bond, although they admit Sean Connery was good too. Can't argue with that really. They considered other ideas for GoldenEye but pretty quickly settled on it being a first-person shooter, which was definitely the way to go considering the success of Doom and Quake. They even mention looking at Quake around 3/4 of the way through development, but stuck to their original plan. They were keen not to just copy elements from other games. It sounds like working with the Bond license was a bit nerve-wracking, a big responsibility and all that, but they didn't let it weigh them down too much. They were focused on making a great game, which they certainly did. There's a question about whether anyone on the team had worked on a game before, and apparently only Graham and Grant had, because they were musicians. Grant worked on Donkey Kong Land on the Game Boy, and Graham did Blast Corps and Diddy Kong Racing. They also mention Martin, who worked on Kong Racing, and Killer Instinct on the coin-op. Finally, they chat about the music in GoldenEye, and how it was influenced by the Bond score. They thought it was good fun to compose, especially for a game like that, as the music is really important. So yeah, it's a look back at the making of a classic N64 game, GoldenEye, from the guys who made it. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine delves into GoldenEye 007, doesn't it? They're chatting with the folks at Rare who made it, and it's all about the details they put into the game. They start off by mentioning how chuffed they are with the sniper rifle zoom, having a dig at Turok for having to mist everything up close to hide the draw distance limitations. Cheeky! Rare reckon they just programmed it right and could draw things further away on the N64. Simple as that apparently. They then go on about the attention to detail, like bullet holes in walls, and being able to shoot out glass and security cameras. Apparently all that destructible stuff was on their wish list from the start, which is pretty impressive when you think back to games at the time. To get the levels right, they actually went down to the film sets 6 or 7 times, got access to everything, took photos and blueprints, and used all that to build the game levels. Explains why they felt so spot on really. Walking around those places in the game felt properly like the films. There's a bit about the character movement. They wanted it to feel realistic. They realized running around at crazy speeds like in Doom didn't feel right for Bond. So they made him move at a more believable pace, which was a bit different back then. Warring. There's a picture of the full 9-strong GoldenEye team, looking rather pleased with themselves, and rightly so. They got a special N64 certificate. Cheeky caption pointing out one bloke's face in particular. They ask about favorite levels, and Rare say Control and Bunker are top. Control because it's big and the health works well, and Bunker because of the stealth bit. They reckon you can tear through the bunker level in 43 seconds, blimey. Speedrunners, eh? Then there's a question about why they chose Jaws and Baron Samedi as secret characters. Seems they just liked those colourful villains. Apparently they had access to pretty much all the Bond films except Jack Wade, whoever he is. Not a classic villain then. They joked about even wanting to put a witch doctor in there, bonkers. Multiplayer is discussed, and they were worried about having 4 players on screen at once, as no one had really done that properly in a first-person shooter on consoles before. They spent ages tweaking it to make it fun, playing the levels themselves to see what worked. Some levels like the Dam were great for multiplayer, but others just couldn't handle it. Cool. They mentioned Bunker level only being 3 players, and Rare say it's because some levels just weren't designed for multiplayer in mind, and couldn't handle the action with 4 players. Fair enough. Finally, they touch on immersion, and Rare reckon it's all the little things, like being able to damage the environment, that makes it feel more real, and they were quite proud of that. They even put the multiplayer in quite late in development, about 6 months before release, which is quite late in the day really, but they always intended to have it in. This page is an interview with Rare, the folks behind GoldenEye on the N64. They're being all mysterious about their location, calling it their Twycross hideout like their MI5 or something, even though it's just in the Midlands. They reckon it suits them though, keeps them focused on making games. Apparently, back when they started, Donkey Kong Country was only half done. That's going back a bit. They were Spectrum heads back in the day. The interview touches on Nintendo being a bit worried about the violence in GoldenEye, but they got over it, especially when it got a teen rating. GoldenEye took them about 2.5 years to make, which is a fair old whack of time. They even mention playing Banjo-Kazooie in the office at lunchtime every day. Sounds like a bit of alright fun, to be fair. They didn't expect GoldenEye to be such a massive hit, mind you. They had a wish list of things they wanted to add, but you know how it is. Looking ahead, they're being asked about what's next for the GoldenEye team. Seems like it won't be another Bond game. Something about MGM and licensing with some other developer called Black Ops. Bit of a shame if you ask me, but there you go. However, it sounds like the GoldenEye team is cracking on with a new project using the same engine, but with their own characters and levels. They reckon it'll be about 2.5 years away. The magazine bods in a "what we think" bubble are saying Tomorrow Never Dies isn't going to be it, so it's clearly something else. There's a picture of Duncan Botwood and Stephen Ellis, 2 of the Rare lads, looking like they've just been grilled about their next game. All in all, it's a decent peek behind the curtain at Rare during their GoldenEye heyday. This page depicts a bit of a deep dive into game stats for the N64, classic magazine fodder. In it It's titled Game for a Graph, which is pretty self-explanatory. First off, there's a new high score chart showing off the top 20 highest rated games they've reviewed in the last year. Right at the top, no surprises, it's Super Mario 64 with a stonking 96%. GoldenEye 007 is nipping at its heels with 94%, and then you've got the football game International Superstar Soccer 64 and Madden 64 tied on 92%. Blimey, those were the days, weren't they? Proper classics getting top marks. Further down we see the likes of Lilac Wars or Star Fox 64 as the Yanks call it, Turok, Mario Kart 64, Diddy Kong Racing, Wave Race 64, Mischief Makers and Pilot Wings 64, all scoring well in the 90s and high 80s. Blast Corps gets an 88%. Which is fair enough, a bit quirky that one. Then you've got Snowboard Kids, Extreme G, Top Gear Rally, Fighter's Destiny, NFL Quarterback Club, Yoshi's Story, and right at the bottom Duke Nukem 64 with 85%. Solid scores all round really, makes you realise how good the N64 launch year was. There's a pie chart breaking down favourite game styles based on these top 20 games. It's showing racers are the biggest chunk, then platformers, first-person shooters, beat-em-ups, puzzle games, shoot-em-ups, sports and flight sim genres all represented. Around the pie chart are little images meant to represent each genre. You can see a car for racing, a bloke with a gun for first-person shooter, and so on. It's a bit of fun, helps visualize what types of games were doing well. Then there's a couple of smaller pie charts looking at country of origin for these top games. One shows that Japan is clearly winning, followed by the US, then the UK in third place. Another chart, labeled Top 10 and Top 20, seems to suggest that the US has a stronger showing in the top 20 games overall. They're basically saying Japan dominates, but the US is still putting out some quality stuff. Makes sense when you think about it. Nintendo and most of the big hitters were Japanese, but the US had some decent studios too. Lastly, there's a section called Iceland Newell Points, which is a bit of a laugh, referencing the Eurovision Song Contest, comparing it to games. It lists a few titles like MK Mythologies, Aero Gauge, Wheel of Fortune 64, and Clay Fighter 63 1/3, and gives them percentage ratings of 9%, 10%, 17%, and 24% respectively. These are clearly meant to be the less impressive games. They say MK Mythologies is barely a game, and compare it to Nuclear Fallout. Bit harsh, but it was a bit pants compared to proper Mortal Kombat. Aero Gauge, they reckon, is a pole position clone, and only mildly impressive. Wheel of Fortune 64 is mentioned because reviewer ZY, pronounced Zai, apparently threatened to kick its face off if it ever got a PAL release. And Clay Fighter 63 1/3 gets a 24% rating with a "ha ha ha, now go away" comment. Savage. Seems like they're having a bit of a giggle at some of the N64 stinkers. Ha! Overall, it's a typical N64 magazine page from back then, full of charts and opinions about the best and, in this case, the not-so-best N64 games out at the time. Good bit of nostalgia for anyone who was reading it back in '98. This page depicts a voting form from N64 Magazine for the 1998 Reader Awards. It's all presented in a kind of envelope-style design, pretty fancy for a magazine page back then. They're asking readers to vote for their top 5 N64 games because apparently they, the magazine, have got it all wrong in their own top 10. A bit cheeky that, typical magazine banter. It says, "Disagree with our top 10? Here's your chance to set the record straight." So you know they're stirring things up a bit, trying to get the readers involved. They go on about how they had a laugh arguing about the top 20 games in the office for 6 hours. Must have been a right laugh. Imagine being stuck in a room debating Mario 64 versus GoldenEye for that long. To encourage people to vote, they're giving away some prizes. If you send in your votes, you could win a System Rack DX or a Soft Rack, whatever they were, probably some bits of gaming kit. And the top prize is a game of your choice. Not bad. To vote, you had to photocopy or draw out the form, list your top 5 N64 games in order, write your name and address, and post it off to their Bath office. Remember having to actually post things? Seems like ages ago. The closing date was the 17th of April, and they were going to print the results in the June issue, issue 16. Down at the bottom it says in big letters, "Look you idiots, you've got it all completely wrong again." Bit harsh, but it gets your attention. Then it's the actual voting form with numbered lines for your top 5 games, space for your name and address, and a line to say what game you'd like to win if you're lucky enough to get your name pulled out of the N64 hat. Classic magazine stuff from back in the day, getting the readers involved and feeling like their opinions mattered, even if it was just for a bit of fun in a magazine. This page depicts a GoldenEye Spymaster competition from N64 Magazine. It's all very tongue-in-cheek, asking if you're handy with your Walther PPK and a sniper rifle, even mentioning a coiled and marginally rabid stoat. Typical magazine humor back then, eh? They reckon if you are all these things, you're perfect for a license to kill. It's a competition based around the GoldenEye 007 game, of course, probably the biggest game on the N64 at the time. The challenge itself is described as penetrating a secret Siberian nuclear bunker, which sounds very GoldenEye-esque. It's apparently a tricky contest needing accuracy and speed. Remember having to record yourself playing on video and sending it in? Madness, really, but that's what you had to do to prove you were a proper gamer. The prizes were pretty decent, actually. First place got a framed license to kill signed by someone from Rare, which was a big deal back then. Rare were gods. Plus, a golden gun on a plinth. Very Bond, very cool. MI5 apparently confirmed it all, haha. Very official. Second and third place weren't too shabby either, getting silver and bronze licenses, and an N64 game. Good times. Good times. This page just screams late 90s N64 gaming hype, really. This page is all about GoldenEye, as if we needed reminding back then, eh? It's shouting 007I in great big letters, with a slightly less shouty bit underneath, asking if you think you're Britain's best GoldenEye player. Of course, everyone thought they were, didn't they? Especially after a few cans of fizzy pop, and a late night session with your mates. And what's this then? A golden gun. Literally. Looks like the prize for being the Spymaster champion in some kind of competition. Fancy, innit? Probably just a gold-plated thing, but still. Back in '98, that would have been pretty flash. GoldenEye was massive, everyone was playing it, so they knew exactly how to grab your attention. Are you Britain's best? Cheeky. They knew we'd all be thinking, yeah, maybe I am. Good old N64 Mag, always knew how to wind us up and get us playing. This page depicts an advertisement for a GoldenEye 007 Spymaster competition in N64 Magazine. It's all about proving you're Britain's best GoldenEye player, which back in '98 was a pretty big deal. Everyone was obsessed with GoldenEye at the time. There are 3 qualifying rounds to get through. The first one is on the facility level, on agent difficulty. You've got to complete it with a 90% or higher success rate for headshots, which sounds a bit of a pain. Even back then we knew headshots were the way to go, but 90%? They suggest taking your time and padding around, and using a silencer to be sneaky, and reminding you where the body armor is near the toilets. Classic facility tactics, really. The format for proving you did it is a photo or video. Tactics, really. Qualifying round 2 is on the silo level, again on agent difficulty. This time it's a speed run, under 3 minutes to complete it, and unlock the turbo mode cheat. They point out silo is linear so you shouldn't get lost, and the keys are on scientists, which everyone knew, but they are randomly placed each time, so that could be annoying. They also mention Aurumov turning up after the computer room and needing a good few shots to take down. Again, format is photo or video. And the Norsa, the decider, round 3, is on bunker level 9, still on agent difficulty, and it's all about speed again. They mention no silencer, so forget stealth and just going guns blazing, which was probably how most of us played bunker anyway. They tell you to clear a path for Natalia before releasing her, and watch out for soldiers at the top of the stairs near the exit, which is fair enough, those guys can catch you out. This time, the format is video. Do you want to? Then there's round 4, which sounds like the final. They are inviting the top 3 agents to a briefing in Bath, and then a deathmatch with a member of Department X, which was their name for themselves at N64 Magazine. Bit cheeky? There are some screenshots of a deathmatch game. Looks like standard multiplayer mayhem from GoldenEye. There's a speech bubble with some text from Rob saying, "Running away from me, eh, Trevelyan? Going to do a new series of Sharp," with a reply bubble saying, "Ha! That's what you think. Except I never did any of this with a clob." Bit of light banter about the game, and Pierce Brosnan, who played both Bond and Sharper, trying to be a bit funny about the less than amazing clob weapon in the game. Those were the days. This page shows an advert for a GoldenEye 007 Spymaster competition in N64 Magazine. Seems like they are really pushing this GoldenEye game still, eh? It's all about proving you're the best GoldenEye player to win Scaramanga's prize possession, whatever that is. To enter, you need to complete all 3 rounds of some challenge, getting the best time and accuracy you can manage, and you can enter as many times as you like. You've got to prove you did it properly using modern technology, which back then meant videotape, can you believe it? No streaming your gameplay online in 1998. To prove your score, you have to record bunker-level gameplay from start to finish on video, to stop any cheeky monkeys trying to cheat. You could also photograph the accuracy screen for round 1, cheat confirmation for round 2 and the round 3 time. Or if you're really keen, video the whole lot. You had to fill out a coupon from the magazine and stick it to your video, and send it to the N64 Magazine offices in Bath by Wednesday, April 1st. No joke, that was the deadline. They wanted a stamped addressed envelope if you wanted your video back, bless them. Results were promised in the June issue. Payo. There's a bit about taking photos of the screen, suggesting you turn off the flash and use fast film, and then a guide to recording video by connecting your N64 to your telly and VCR. Remember all that faff? Using SCART leads and tuning the video in, proper palaver it was. Press record, rewind, and send it in. Gutewa. The rules are pretty clear. The first 2 rounds could be photos or video, but the third round, the decider, had to be entirely videoed from the mission file selection right to the end, showing all the achievements. Cheating was a big no-no. They threatened to make you run naked through Dundee singing, "I am Henry V 2I am," if you cheated. Bit extreme, lads. You could enter as much as you wanted if you had enough coupons, and the acting editor's decision was final. The page has a coupon to fill in with your agent name, secret bunker address, contact number, and details of your scores for the qualifying rounds and the decider. It's all very tongue-in-cheek, calling the N64 office an N64 office to infiltrate, and saying the message will self-destruct. Proper spy stuff. It was all good fun at the time, showed you how popular GoldenEye still was back then, even months after it came out. This page depicts an advert for a new section in N64 Magazine, called Skill Club 64. Right in the middle of issue 13, can you believe? It's all about proving you're a top N64 gamer and getting your name in lights, or at least in print in the mag, which was pretty cool at the time. Right, yeah. They're going on about wanting the best gamers in the world to join. Bit over the top. But that's magazines for you back then. Basically, they've got 10 challenges based on 10 N64 games that they reckon everyone's got at home. You had to be able to do these challenges to get a certificate and a scrummy N64 badge. Nice. There were different levels of skill: bronze, silver and gold. Bronze was for managing 3 challenges, silver for 7, and gold if you were some kind of N64 god and could nail all 10. To prove you did it, you had to send in a video or a photo. Bit of effort that. Imagine trying to record yourself playing Mario 64 back then. Sure. They were really pushing the idea of fame and glory, saying you'd get praise and adulation, and your name in the magazine in lights. Figuratively speaking, of course, it's just a magazine page. It was all a bit of fun though, and I reckon loads of kids probably had a go at these challenges, trying to get that gold certificate and badge. It was a good way to get readers involved, fair play to them. And who wouldn't want a scrummy N64 badge? Sounds delightful. This page depicts the Skill Club 64 inches section from an old issue of N64 Magazine. Must be back in 98, judging by the March 1998 at the bottom. Looks like they're setting some challenges for readers to try and complete in various N64 games. Nice. First up is Challenge A for Super Mario 64. Bit of a cheeky one to start with. Asking folks to collect all 120 stars. They say it's a gentle start, which is maybe a little sarcastic considering how much time that takes. Even back then, they wanted a picture of you on the castle roof with Yoshi to prove it. Helpful tips point to early issues of the mag for advice, which is fair enough as those first few issues were packed with Mario 64 secrets. Next is Challenge B for Diddy Kong Racing. This one's about finishing the game in mirror mode and collecting 47 of the platinum balloons. They reckon gold balloons are too easy. Showing off a bit there, aren't they? They want a photo of your cartridge with Adventure 1 and a 47 inches written on it. Bit of a weird specific requirement if you ask me, and also Adventure 2 and a 47. They're directing people to issues 10, 11 and 12 for DKR tips, and the double game guide from issue 11, trying to push their back issues, crafty lot. Challenge C is Lilat Wars, or Star Fox 64 as some of us still call it. The task is to finish the game with at least 1500 hits. They don't care how you do it, just blast everything in sight basically. A picture of the final screen is what they're after. Tips-wise, they mention Gentleman Space Adventurer Quarterly from issue 8, and the double game guide from this very issue, issue 13. Finally, Challenge D is for GoldenEye 007. They want you to complete the game on 0 agent difficulty. Just finishing the game is the objective, but on the hardest setting, no messing about. They want a picture of the game editor screen from the cartridge. Helpful hints point to ISPY Magazine from issue 9, which I vaguely remember, and tips in issues 10, 12 and the double game guide on the front of issue 12. Bit of a typo there as it should be issue 13's double game guide, I guess. Overall, it's a typical Skill Club page, setting a few tough tasks for bragging rights and probably a small prize. Good way to get people to replay these N64 classics and keep reading the magazine. Brings back memories of poring over these pages, trying to get every last star or unlock every secret. This page from N64 Magazine is all about challenges set in different games, to test your skills. In it, Gatigura. First up, Challenge E is International Superstar Soccer 64. Looks like they want you to finish all the scenarios in the game. They reckon it starts easy but gets properly tough later on, especially towards the edges of the scenarios, whatever that means. They even suggest fiddling with the difficulty if you're struggling. Cheeky. Apparently if you send them a video of you completing it, that's proof enough for them. They even mention a guide to the smooth turf of ISS 64 back in issue 4 if you can find it. Good luck with that in 2023, eh? Then there's Challenge F, Mario Kart 64. This one's about getting a time of under 1 minute 20 seconds on Mario Raceway. They mention a time of 1 minute 7 seconds on NTSC, which is likely American telestandard, so PAL folks here might have it a bit different. They say it's all about wall-hopping exploits and mastering the Mario Raceway shortcut. Proper showing off if you can do that. They mention their review in issue 4 again and the double game guide for shortcut tips, so it seems they were plugging older issues a bit, weren't they? Challenge G is Pilotwings 64. This is to win gold medals in every event. Sounds like a proper completionist challenge, that. They say some medals are easy enough, but others, especially the human cannonball affair, are a nightmare to get. They want a picture or video of the medal screen with all golds showing, all 12 slots. Blimey. They say it's one of N64 Magazine's favorite games, but not everyone there has managed this challenge themselves, so good luck to us then. Helpful tips? Not really, unless you can find issue 6, which had a Pilotwings guide. Cheers for nothing then, eh? Finally, Challenge H is for Turok, Dinosaur Hunter. They want you to complete the time challenge mode in under 3 minutes. Crikey, that sounds fast. They reckon you need to find a secret shortcut and be dead accurate. Not a problem, we're sure, they say with a hint of sarcasm, I reckon. And as for helpful tips? Nada. They haven't done a guide to the time trial mode, so good luck on your own. Bit helpful, aren't they? So there you go, a page of challenges to keep you busy on your N64. Whether you can actually manage any of them without going grey is another question entirely. Still, good times, eh? This page depicts a couple of challenges from an old issue of N64 Magazine, issue 13, back from March 1998. Blimey, that takes me back. We're looking at Skill Club 64, which was a regular feature where they set you challenges in N64 games, and you could send in proof to get a badge and certificate. Bit of fun, that. Challenge I is for Blastcore. Crikey, what a game that was. Proper unique, that one. You had to win gold medals on all the Earth-based events, then move on to the solar system levels on the Moon, Mars, Venus, Mercury and Neptune. They weren't asking for platinum medals, thankfully, just gold. The magazine hints at Jess's tips from issue 8 for help, probably some clever tricks from one of their reviewers. Then there's Challenge J for Wave Race 64, another classic. The challenge is to break 1 minute 17 seconds on Sunny Beach time trial, or 1 minute 4 seconds if you had an NTSC console. Bragging rights for the import owners, eh? They say it's tricky but doable with practice, suggesting a video of the race record screen as proof. Remember mucking about with videotapes to prove your scores? Madness. Shigehai. Down below, the rules section explains you needed 3 bronze challenges for a bronze award, 7 for silver, and all 10 to get on the gold list. You could enter for any challenge level, and use PAL or NTSC versions of the games, though NTSC was always a bit faster, wasn't it? Crucially, you needed photo or video proof, and they were wise to cheat cartridges, threatening ritual humiliation for offenders. Bit strong, that. Bronze, silver and gold winners would be published in the magazine. How to. Prove your achievements gives instructions for taking photos and videos of your telescreen. Remember having to mess about with video leads and tuning the video recorder. All a bit of faff compared to screenshots these days. They suggest fast film for photos, 200 or even 400 ASA, to reduce flash reflection. Finally, there's an entry form to send in. You could tick boxes for challenges you'd completed from a list of games. Super Mario 64, Diddy Kong Racing, Lilat Wars, Star Fox 64 to some of us, GoldenEye 007, ISS 64, Mario Kart 64, Pilotwings 64, Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, Blastcore and Wave Race 64. A right proper selection of N64 classics there. You had to send in your name and address to get your badge and certificate. They even suggest photocopying the form if you didn't want to cut up your magazine. Those were the days. This page details the early days of launching N64 Magazine, right from about a year after the Nintendo 64 came out. It's got a bit of a behind-the-scenes look, talking about how they got the magazine off the ground, which is kind of interesting to read now, looking back. They start in November 96 when Jonathan was hired as editor. Seems like he was a PC gamer bloke before. Drafted in to head up this new N64 mag, just as the console was hitting shops. Apparently his Doom skills were a factor, which is a funny thought for a Nintendo mag. He gets a team together, Will, James and Tim, to help him out. Then in December 96, they're having the initial meetings, trying to figure out what the magazine's going to be. The big question is what to call it. They were throwing around some real shockers as names, weren't they? Super 64, Total 64, Planet 64. A bit generic if you ask me. Then they get even more creative with names based on the team, like 64 Cadet for James, 64 Homeboy for Tim, Anime 64 Feet for Will, and even Clone 64 Feet for Jonathan himself. Thankfully, none of those stuck. They went back to the drawing board, as they say. Moving into January 97, they're getting ready for the first issue and making a video preview, using footage from the Shoshinkai show that would have been exciting at the time, getting a proper look at upcoming games. There's a bit of a weird anecdote about James needing a haircut for the video, and then some office antics involving Tim saying, Yakasamaka, and getting punched. Sounds like a typical lads mag office environment back then, a bit rough and tumble. But they say despite all that, the excitement for the magazine was still bubbling away. In a yellow box they highlight the Mario Kart Championship as a big early success for the magazine, saying everyone went mad for it, and they were knee-deep in videos for months. Remember that? Everyone loved a bit of Mario Kart 64 back then, proper multiplayer madness. Hacha. Looking at the page, there's also some glimpses of early N64 magazine covers. You can see Mario himself on a few, plus mentions of games like Shadows of the Empire and Turok. Shadows of the Empire, that was the Star Wars game bridging the gap between the films, wasn't it? And Turok, the dinosaur shooter, a bit of a system seller at the time, showing off the N64's 3D power. All classic N64 stuff, brings back some memories. This page from an old N64 magazine seems to be looking back at the early days and the people behind the publication. At the top left, there's a section called Gentleman Space Quarterly / I Spy, which is highlighted with a star. It talks about their poster magazines and how they were supposed to be good guides and cheat sources for N64 games. Remember those poster mags? Bit of a novelty at the time, I suppose. Then there's a bit about February 1997 where they were trying to come up with a name for the magazine. Apparently someone called Tim suggested N64 Magazine, and everyone thought it was brilliant after some initial chin scratching. Classic, simple as you like, and it worked, didn't it? They even had a mock-up cover with Super 64 inches before settling on the obvious. Sounds like a right laugh in the office back then. Then it jumps to March 27, 1997, saying the first issue came out, complete with a video, fancy that. Apparently, it sold 37,000 copies pretty quickly, which is not bad going at all. Over on the right, under the people, it introduces some of the staff. Jonathan Davies, apparently, was a bit of a character known for his impressions and office antics, now moved on to a quiet garden plot in Shepherd's Bush, wherever that is. James Ashton is described as a muscular-ridden writing machine who never gets a haircut, and is a born leader of men and women. Bit strong that, but you know how magazines big themselves up. Tim Weaver is the office joker apparently, doing death-defying tightrope walks with Will's hair. Sounds like a typical office prankster. Andrea Ball apparently was a page 3 model before becoming production editor. Bit of a career change. She enjoys thrashing the others with a stick, alright Andrea. Will Overton, born in the Essex Badlands in 1913, which is clearly a joke, apparently went a bit funny after hitting his head and thought he was Japanese. And finally there's Paul Jarrold, the ladies' man and future's sexiest man, likes Jackie Collins novels and knock jokes apparently. Sounds like a right bunch of characters. Down at the bottom left, another highlight mentions E3/Spaceworld reports from Tim and James, saying they were packed with info and humor. E3 and Spaceworld, those were the days for game announcements, weren't they? There are some game screenshots scattered about too. You can see Mario Go! And Turok on magazine covers, must be launch titles or close to it. And there's a little bit about I Spy with GoldenEye 007 mentioned. Everyone was mad for GoldenEye back then, weren't they? And Space Adventurer Quarterly. Probably another one of their poster mags with Fox McCloud on the cover. Overall, it's a look back at the beginnings of the magazine and the team, with a bit of blurb about some of the early content. Pretty standard stuff for a magazine celebrating itself, but takes you back a bit. This page from the magazine is getting us all excited about 1998 being the year of the N64, and fair play, there were some crackers coming out. First up, Under Action, it's all about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or Zelda 64 as they were calling it back then. They reckon it's going to be massive, maybe even the best game of the year. Remember all the hype around Spaceworld and seeing Zelda in 3D for the first time? Blimey, buddy. Then in Racing, It's F0X. Miyamoto's had a tinker with it, apparently, making it even faster than the SNES original. They're banging on about 1,000 km per hour and 30 races on screen with no slowdown, which was quite something at the time. Under RPG, they've got Hybrid Heaven, trying to big it up as a sign that third-party RPGs could work on the N64, comparing it to Metal Gear Solid, which was a bit of a stretch, wasn't it? Seemed alright from the video mind. Football is ISS Pro 98, claiming it's miles better than everything else, even ISS 64. Proper footy for the proper footy fan apparently. Then Odd is talent/picture/polygon maker for the 64DD. Bit of a weird one this, even they admit it's odd. Nintendo thinking they're changing gaming forever, as usual. Remember the 64DD? Didn't exactly set the world on fire, did it? Whew. The best of the rest tan news section, they're talking about a few more games. Banjo-Kazooie, another Rare game, comparing it to Mario 64. Conker's Quest, also from Rare, apparently like Banjo, but they reckon Conker himself is a bit dodgy. More sickening than a fridge full of Stilton. Charming. Body Harvest, that DMA design game that was in development for ages, they're calling it a dark horse. Turok 2, having a go at GoldenEye, reckon Iguana are learning from Rare. Holy Magic Century, an RPG they think might be first on the N64. Mother 3 for the 64DD, another RPG, reckon it'll be big after Zelda. And lastly Mission Impossible the movie tie-in, getting rejigged by Infogrames. Wonder if it'll actually be any good. These film games are always a gamble, aren't they? The reviewer, Zai, seems cautiously optimistic about it all. Good times, good times. This page depicts an advert for Snowboard Kids on the Nintendo 64, emblazoned with the words, "Board Crazy," in big, bold lettering. It's got that classic colourful N64 box art style, all bright blues and whites and cartoon characters looking a bit daft on snowboards. You've got these kids pulling off some pretty wild poses. The main one right in the centre looks like he's doing a thumbs up, bless him. There's another character flying through the air looking a bit surprised. They've got those bright colours you always saw in N64 games. Orange, pink, yellow. You know the drill. Down the bottom it mentions gravity junkies and nose-grabbing stunts. Sounds like they're trying to make it sound like it's really pushing the envelope. They're also banging on about board-mounted rocket launchers. Rocket launchers on snowboards? Right then. It also says an avalanche of 4-player mayhem, so it's a multiplayer game, naturally. Warrington. Apparently N64 Magazine gave it 88%, which is a pretty decent score back then, isn't it? They must have liked it, or maybe it was just a slow month for games. It mentions, tool up with a rumble pack and feel every wipeout. Ah yes, the rumble pack, making your controller vibrate for extra immersion, or just to annoy your mum when you were playing late at night. They are trying to sell it for £39.99, mind you. That's quite a bit of dosh for a game back then. It also has all the usual buzzwords at the bottom. 64-bit power, 94 MHz speed, 3D environment, precision control and multiplayer, and of course rumble pack. And look at that, a small mention of Mario Kart 64 inches on ice. Cheeky. So yeah, Snowboard Kids looked a bit like a Mario Kart on snowboards, didn't it? Whether it was any good or not, well, that's another question entirely. But it definitely had that bright cartoonish look that was all the rage on the N64 at the time. This page reveals the results of the Grand Lilac Wars Championship, which is what we called Star Fox 64 back then in the UK, you know. It seems Electronics Boutique, bless their souls, sponsored the whole thing. There's a big picture of Fox McCloud looking rather pleased with himself, as you'd expect. Apparently, they were swamped with entries. Which doesn't surprise me, as everyone was mad for Star Fox 64 at the time. Proper blast, wasn't it, with the rumble pack and all? The winner was some chap from Holland called Patrick Wessel, who got a frankly ludicrous score of 2041. Good on him, though he couldn't make it to the final in Bath to defend his title, which is a bit of a shame. He still got 200 quid in Electronics Boutique vouchers as compensation, not bad at all. The actual final was between the top 3 Brits, held in Bath of all places, and the first prize was a whopping 400 quid in EB vouchers, with 200 for second place. Gary Kerr came in second, and the Cole brothers, Gavin and Jonathan from Washington, were third and fourth. Not sure why fourth place is mentioned, but there you go. Bredice. Down at the bottom there's a list titled, Where in the Wide World of Games, which is basically a directory of Electronics Boutique stores. It lists loads of towns and cities like Aberdeen, Ashford, Ayr, right through to York, and places like Birmingham Corporation Street, and Bristol Galleries. Every high street seemed to have one of those shops back then, didn't they? It even tells you to call 0803 177 78 to find your nearest store. which is handy if you wanted to spend your winnings, I suppose. Good times. This page covers the final rounds of the Lilac Wars Championship from N64 Magazine, good old Star Fox 64 that was called Lilac Wars over here. It seems they had 3 lads, Gary, Jonathan and Gavin, battling it out after lunch. Apparently a chap named James was there too, but didn't really feature much in the final rounds. They played 4 rounds to decide the winner, and the scores were tallied up. Round 1 was about getting the best score on Corneria, a classic level. Gary smashed it with 248 hits, impressive stuff. Jonathan was close behind and Gavin was lagging a bit. Round 2 was a battle on Corneria, using the R-Wings. These guys were clearly pretty good at this game. It was first to 5 points. Gary won again. Round 3 moved to Solar. Another battle, this time Gary won again with Jonathan second and Gavin third. Round 4 was back on Corneria, still battling, and Gavin finally managed to get a win, but Gary was still ahead on points overall. Then it got tense, as Jonathan and Gavin were tied for second place, so they had a tiebreaker, sudden death battle on Corneria. In the end, Gavin beat Jonathan and faced Gary in the final. Jorrington Nolsa Hasme. The final, also sudden death on Corneria, was between Gary and Gavin. It sounds like it was a close fight, but in the end, Gavin managed to pull it off and become the Lilac Wars champion. Good on him. They even say he's Britain's greatest Lilac Wars player. A bit much perhaps, but it's all a bit of fun, isn't it? Cheer. The page also has some pictures of the lads playing, looking very serious and focused. There is also a list of locations, looks like places where you could buy the magazine, from Darlington to Lisburn, all over the UK. Must have been everywhere then, didn't think twice about seeing N64 Mag on the shelves back then, did you? Good times. This page showcases the winner of the Lilac Wars Championship, a chap called Gavin Cole from up north, Washington Tyne and Ware no less, who is officially Britain's best Lilac Wars pilot. Good on him, he's won £400 worth of Electronics Boutique vouchers, which back then was a pretty decent haul, and enough to keep anyone going with new N64 games for a while. It mentions he wasn't sure how he'd spend it, but I reckon he managed somehow. There were a couple of screenshots from Lilac Wars, one showing a boss being taken down, they called it boss disposal, quite the phrase, and another showing R-Wing gameplay. Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as our American cousins knew it. What a game that was. Properly blew you away with the graphics at the time and the rumble pack. Do a barrel roll. Could get a bit repetitive though. There's a photo of 3 lads, Gary, Jonathan and Gavin, presumably the winner, looking like they're having a good time playing games. Reminds me of weekends, spent round a mate's house, glued to the screen. Then there's a big advert for Electronics Boutique, or EB as we called it, banging on about how good they are. Lowest price guarantee. Played it? Trade it. Customer service, loyalty card, all the usual guff. They reckon they've got 5 reasons why they're a good bet for your game purchasing needs. They were alright, EB. Always had a decent selection. And at the bottom there's a long list of Electronics Boutique store locations. All over the place, from Liverpool to York and everywhere in between. They were everywhere back then, weren't they? Oh, and there's a don't forget bit about a GoldenEye Spymaster competition on page 62. GoldenEye, now that was a proper game changer, split-screen multiplayer madness, everyone huddled around the telly. Are you Britain's best secret agent? Bit cheesy, but we lapped it up. This page is from N64 Magazine, issue 13 it seems, and it's all about FIFA 98. Right then, so it's a how-to guide to qualify for the World Cup in the game, a bit late as they say belatedly, given it's March 98 and Christmas has been and gone. They're calling it the #1 game over Christmas and reckon it deserves a #1 guide, which is a bit of a bold claim in it. Tim Weaver's written it and he starts off by saying, FIFA 98 might have been beaten by ISS 64 by 3 clear goals in a pretty one-sided final. Bit harsh on FIFA there, sounds like someone at the mag preferred ISS. Still, he does say FIFA 98 is a good effort at the beautiful game. They're bigging themselves up as the beacon of international management brilliance for giving us this guide. Cheeky sods. Down at the bottom, in the previously in N64 bit, it mentions FIFA 98 got 83% in the Christmas issue review. So not a bad score at all, even if they're hinting it wasn't quite as good as ISS at the time. Overall, it's a typical magazine page, bigging up a popular game, giving some advice, and reminding you of their previous coverage. You know, standard magazine fare from back then. This page in N64 Magazine, right then, it's all about getting to grips with FIFA 98 on the Nintendo 64. They're calling it the training ground control, and it's trying to explain the basics of how to play. First off, they're banging on about the analog stick, as you do back then, like it's the newest thing since sliced bread. They say you actually have to use it properly in FIFA 98 to choose your player and direct passes, unlike ISS 64 where you could just hammer the A button. Bit of a dig at Konami there, cheeky. Darny. Then there's the A button section explaining that it's not just for passing but also switches players. Apparently, if you are getting called for fouls when tackling, it's probably because you're controlling the wrong player, something we've all been guilty of, eh? They also mention you can direct headers and volleys with the A button and the stick. Handy to know, I suppose. Next up is the B button, and this is your shooting and tackling button, the important stuff. They reckon shooting is simple, just aim with the stick and hold B. But they also admit scoring is a bit random in FIFA 98, even if you try to be precise. Tackling with B is apparently good but risky, especially in the box, could easily give away a penalty. They warn you about sliding tackles against quick strikers, saying you'll probably just get a red card for your trouble. Wise words. Finally, there's a little box called ship-shaped listing teams to watch in each country. England is Man United, Liverpool, Arsenal and Newcastle, standard top four really back then. Scotland is Rangers and Celtic, naturally. Italy's AC Milan, Inter, Juventus and Parma. A proper golden era of Italian football that was. Holland's Ajax and PSV Eindhoven, again the usual suspects. France is Paris Saint-Germain, Marseille and Monaco, showing a bit of League One love. Spain has Barcelona, Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid, the big three as always. Germany is Bayern Munich, Dortmund, Werder Bremen, solid German clubs. Sweden is Gothenburg and Trelleborg, a bit more obscure there. Malaysia is Brunei and Lumpur, interesting choices. America is Dallas, New York and Vancouver, before the MLS really took off. And Brazil is Flamengo, International and Santos, some classic Brazilian sides. Porreja. Overall, it's a pretty basic guide for FIFA 98, probably aimed at newcomers to the game or those who are still used to older footy games. ZY, the reviewer, is keeping it fairly straightforward, no massive hype, just practical tips for getting better at the game. Good stuff for its time, I suppose. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 13, looks at getting to grips with the C buttons in what looks like FIFA on the N64. FIFA 98 probably, back when we were still getting used to 3D football games. It's titled How To, and it's all about the C buttons and what they do in the game. First up is bottom C. Apparently, this is your sliding tackle button, which, let's be honest, was always a bit risky in these older football games. 1 minute you were a hero, the next you were off the pitch, but according to the mag, it's good if you get the timing right. On attack, bottom C is a lobbed pass, good for picking out your forwards. The beginnings of FIFA's very best move, they say, with a bit of fanfare, simply tap bottom C for a lofted ball. Yeah, alright, it was alright for its time, wasn't it? Wah. Then there's left C, and this is supposed to be your sprint. But hold on, they're saying it's not very much of a sprint, just a few seconds of extra pace. Cheers for that then. Apparently, tapping it is key to keep the speed up. Holding it down does nothing. They reckon it's best for short bursts in midfield, not for proper wing play. Sounds about right. Remember those sprints? Felt like you were wading through treacle half the time anyway. Top C is the through ball, a classic. They're saying it's not as good as in ISS 64, which is a fair point. ISS 64 did have some cracking through balls, but still useful, especially if you bring your players to the ball rather than waiting for it to come to them. Defensively, they say you can use top C to shoulder barge, or even elbow players. Bit cheeky that, especially if the ref isn't looking, they even say, with a wink. Finally, right C is a bit of a defensive all-rounder. Holding it down lets you evade tackles, and with the Z trigger you can do a slinky foot over ball sway. Sounds fancy. And tapping right C twice makes you dive. They say it's good near opponents, especially if they've robbed the ball from you. It won't win you mates in multiplayer though, especially when they show it back in slow motion. Diving. The dark arts were alive and well even back then. Bulwa. So yeah, a little guide to the C buttons in FIFA, back when we were all figuring out how to play football games in 3D. Nothing too earth-shattering but probably helpful at the time for some folks getting to grips with the N64 controller and FIFA. This page from N64 Magazine, back in March 98, is all about getting your team tactics spot on in FIFA 98 for the N64. It's in a section called The Dressing Room Management, which is quite apt really. It starts off talking about formation, saying how FIFA 98 gives you a fair few options, like the usual 532, 442, 433 and 352 formations. It even mentions you can get more defensive or attacking if you fancy it, by messing with the number of players in each third of the pitch. Remember spending ages fiddling with formations trying to find that magic combo? Yeah, good times, sort of. Next up is positioning/strategy. This section suggests tinkering with individual player positions once you've picked your formation. It makes sense really, wanting your best players in the right spots. They reckon it's worth spending time on this to get your midfield and attack where you want them. Sounds obvious now, doesn't it? Then there's starting lineup, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's about picking your team. The article points out you can easily get to grips with this and move players about. They make a point that you shouldn't just stick Shearer at right back, which is a bit of a laugh. I mean, who would do that? Unless you were really desperate. Bah, kick takers is next. Apparently, in FIFA 98, no one player is noticeably better at dead balls than anyone else, so you can just pick whoever you want to take corners and free kicks. They do suggest putting a midfielder on corners, so your striker is free in the box. Makes sense, I suppose. Attacking bias is about where your players are positioned when you attack. It says it's best used on the midfield and sweeper players, so you can make sure they're always there on the counter. They reckon strikers will naturally be in the last third anyway, so don't bother with them. Forward-thinking central midfielders and wingers are the way to go, apparently. Finally, for team management, there's aggression. This is used for your back four and defensive midfielders. It says turning up the aggression makes your tackles stronger. It's a foot-in type of game anyway, but sliding tackles with extra strength sounds like a recipe for a red card fest to me. Serious limb removal, they joke. Nice. Underneath all that management stuff is post-match analysis, the weather. It explains how different weather types affect the game. Hot weather means the pitch is fast, good for passing, but players tire quicker, so easy on the sprint button. Dry is perfect football conditions, good for passing and long balls, and you can sprint without tiring. Rain means long passes are rubbish as they go out of play, but short passes stick. They recommend lobbing the ball and avoiding heavy tackles. Snow is difficult, sliding tackles are dodgy, watch out for late tackles in the box, and use the glide for passing. Sleet is like snow but stodgier, and they say it's time for a long ball game. Get your big centre forward out. So yeah, there you have it, a tactical deep dive into FIFA 98's management options. It's all pretty basic stuff now, but back then, these little tips were actually quite handy for getting the edge on your mates down the pub, or your younger brother who always thought he was better than you. Ah, memories. This page, titled The Match Qualifying Groups in N64 Magazine, delves into the rather complicated world of World Cup qualifying for the upcoming France 98 tournament. It breaks down the different confederations, or zones as they call them here, explaining how each region decides who gets to play on the big stage. Starting with Zone 1, South America, it's called Confederación Sudamericana de Fútbol. Apparently, it's a tricky group even without Brazil automatically qualifying as World Cup holders. Argentina, with Batistuta and Caniggia, are tipped to be strong. They mention Chile, Colombia, Uruguay, and Paraguay as other teams to watch. The star player is Gabriel Batistuta, described as fast, quick and powerful, and the star team is Argentina, kitted out in their classic pale blue and white stripes. Zone 2 is Oceania, the Oceania Football Confederation. This one sounds a bit of a mess, with a super complicated qualifying system spread over 5 rounds. Australia and New Zealand get byes, and it seems like it's all a bit of a Sunday League affair with teams like Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu mentioned in the difficulty section. Mark Bosnich, the Aussie keeper, is the star player, described as acrobatic and mobile, playing for Australia in yellow and green. Zone 3, Asian Football Confederation, is another complicated one, described as, let's make it as complicated as possible. It's got groups within groups, and playoffs to decide who plays off again. Japan and South Korea are highlighted as the real footballing pedigree, with Saudi Arabia lagging a bit. Lee Yamauchi of Japan is the star player, an intelligent passer, and Japan's team strip is dark blue and white. Zone 4 is the Union of European Football Association, UEFA, much more familiar territory. They're joking about England being lumped with Poland and Scotland getting a group of death. 50 nations are involved, and 14 progress. Europe is considered the hardest zone, with almost every nation being capable of playing top-quality football. Alan Shearer for England is the star player, labelled as one of the best strikers in the world. England's kit is the classic white shirts and dark blue shorts. Zone 5 is the Confed of North, Central and Caribbean Football, CONCACAF. Mexico usually dominate this zone, with the USA and Jamaica behind. The format is apparently too complicated to explain, but essentially, the USA and Mexico get a bye to the third round. Luis Enrique of Mexico is the star player, a quick-thinking passer, and Mexico's kit is green shirts and white shorts. Finally, Zone 6, Confédération Africaine de Football, CAF, the African zone. Pelé apparently predicted an African World Cup winner by the year 2000, but they are running out of time according to the magazine. Cameroon, Egypt, Morocco and Nigeria get byes to the second round. Nigeria, South Africa and Morocco are mentioned as the strongest teams. Yekini George of Nigeria is the star player, a towering striker, and Nigeria play in green and white. Overall, it's a good overview of the upcoming World Cup qualifiers across the globe, typical magazine fodder, to get you in the mood for the tournament, even if some of these qualifying formats sound like they were designed by someone on the back of a fag packet down the pub. ZY, the reviewer, seems to be laying it on a bit thick with the difficulty ratings, but it's all part of the pre-tournament build-up hype, isn't it? This page is taking a look at indoor football games. Must be something like ISS 64, or maybe FIFA 64. Around 98, those were the days. It's got a little feature called Late Night Sports Special Indoor Stadium, giving tips on how to win at these games. Things like using the walls for 1-at-2s, sprinting everywhere because the pitches are tiny, and just shooting on sight. Apparently, indoor goals are smaller but easier to score in, even against better teams, which sounds about right. Those games could be a bit bonkers sometimes. There are screenshots dotted around with little commentary boxes. One of them is quoting Andy Gray saying, "The Mexicans have to ask themselves serious questions here. Something about a goal, reckons he's right, typical Andy Gray, isn't it?" Another one mentions old Argies, and something about 1986, must be some football rivalry thing going on there. They also mention a Wrightster, who is showing his prowess. Sounds like they're having a bit of fun with the commentary in these games. Over on the right of the page is an advert for Total Film Magazine. Looks like the new issue stars some big names: Kurt Russell, Morgan Freeman and Danny DeVito. A bit of an odd mix if you ask me. Inside they've got 10 pages of previews for films coming out in '98. Crikey, that's a blast from the past. There's something about Kevin Costner directing again, Spielberg's Amistad, which was a heavy one, and movie endings being messed with. Intriguing. Looks like they are pushing movie heroines who mean business as a main feature, and then Peel Us, Big Lebowski, Hard Rain, and Species 2 are mentioned. Crikey, Species 2, I'd almost forgotten about that one. And then Hopkins and Baldwin fight bears in the edge. That was a bit of a lad's film, wasn't it? Finally, The Sad, Solitary Habits of Barry Norman. Sounds like a bit of a change of pace there. Total Film. On sale now, it says, so must be current issue for back then. This page is from an old N64 magazine. Looks like it's telling you how to track down the best game bargains. Bit of a throwback in it. Remember those days, before everything was online? You actually had to go out and find deals, with a map, and your wallet. They've got a Nokia brick phone there, classic, and a wallet stuffed with cash and credit cards, plus some loose change scattered about. Very symbolic of the time, trying to save a few quid on games. It's by Steve Owen apparently, bless him, writing about the age-old quest for cheaper games, probably for the N64 if it's in this mag. It's all very pre-internet bargain hunting, reminds you of traipsing around car boot sales and second-hand shops to find a decent game without breaking the bank. A simpler time maybe. Though finding a decent game bargain was always a win back then, wasn't it? This page from N64 Magazine, year issue 13, March 1998's got a how-to guide. This one's track down the best game bargains. Remember the days of trying to get the most for your money with games? Yeah. It starts with a little anecdote about a conversation with Steve Swiss Oven, who must have been one of the old hands at N64 Mag back then. The idea was about finding good game deals, even if you were a player without loads of cash, trying to get £100 worth of games. Then it goes into a bit of a story about the writer going out shopping to see what bargains could be found. GoldenEye gets a mention, no surprise there, that was the must-have game at the time. They also mention Rumble Pack games, and FIFA 98, proper footy on the N64. It seems like they were testing out game exchange deals, and comparing prices at different shops to see who was giving the best value. At the end of the article, they've got a kind of rating system for the shops they visited, judging them on things like pricing, how much the staff knew about games, how helpful they were, the range of stock and the general vibe of the place. They called it a top dog rating. A bit of a tongue-in-cheek review of the game's retail scene, I suppose. Those were the days. This page shows a bit of a guide for us, N64 owners back in '98, looking at where to buy games and what to expect from different shops. Up top there's a table reviewing various high street stores, like Boots, Dixon's, Electronics Boutique, GameMe, and even places like HMV and John Lewis for your Nintendo 64 bits and bobs. Jaya. Looks like GoldenEye was the hot ticket at the time, pretty much everyone is recommending it. San Francisco Rush is getting a mention at Dixon's, and Cruisin' USA is kicking about too. Seems like everyone was flogging games for around the £50 mark. Typical, wasn't it? Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as some of us might know it, was going for a bit more at £60. Part Exchange was a bit hit and miss, some were doing it, some weren't. Joypads were around £20, £30, which was a fair whack back then. For best footy game it's mostly ISS 64 getting the nod, or maybe FIFA 98 depending on where you went. And they've even got a top dog rating out of 5 stars, very official. Then there's a bit about game exchanging, telling us to be smart about it. It mentions Electronics Boutique as being alright for part exchange, and Computer Exchange down Tottenham Court Road in London as the place to go, or their branches in Birmingham and Bristol if you were up north or out west. They reckon you get half the second-hand selling price if you want cash, or 2/3 if you exchange for something else. Sounds about right for these places, always trying to get the best of the deal, weren't they? Gem. There are example prices for selling, exchanging and buying second-hand games. Super Mario 64, still a classic, was going for £17 if you sold it, £23 exchange, and £34 to buy second-hand. Pilot Wings 64 was a bit cheaper. Then there's Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire and GoldenEye 007 again, commanding the top prices at £22 sell, £30 exchange, and £45 second-hand buy price. Shows you what games were worth at the time, GoldenEye always holding its value, even back then. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, titled You're Hired and Yours for a Ton, is all about saving a few quid when it comes to N64 games, which back in '98 were not exactly cheap. The first bit, You're Hired, talks about renting games. Remember Blockbuster? It was the place to go if you wanted to try before you buy, or just play something for a weekend. Apparently, they rented N64 games for £4.50 for 2 nights, and even consoles if you were desperate, though the deposit was a bit steep at £150, more than the console cost to buy. They mention older games, like Wave Race being cheaper, and even selling second-hand games and controllers. Good shout for those on a budget, especially if you were after GoldenEye but couldn't find it anywhere to buy. Renting was a decent shout. Then there's Yours for a Ton, which basically means deals for £100. They've done some digging and found a few bundles you could get for your crisp £100 note. It looks like they've ranked them in order of bargainness. Deal number 5 at Dixon's gets you GoldenEye and Diddy Kong Racing brand new. Not bad, 2 top-tier games fresh out of the box. Number 4, you can get GoldenEye new, Diddy Kong Racing new, and a rental game from MVC and Blockbuster. A bit of a weird mix, but okay. Number 3, at Computer Exchange, you could snag GoldenEye second-hand, plus Diddy Kong Racing second-hand, and Everyday Wars, which I don't really remember to be honest, also second-hand. Deal 2, at Blockbuster or Computer Exchange, gets you GoldenEye new, a half-price controller, and Super Mario 64 second-hand. A controller is always useful, especially for multiplayer GoldenEye, and the top bargain, deal number 1 at Computer Exchange or Electronics Boutique, GoldenEye new, Everyday Wars, Part X, whatever that means, probably trade-in, and Diddy Kong Racing, Part X. So basically, you're getting GoldenEye new, and a couple of pre-owned games, for your £100. Looking at these now, it's a funny reminder of how much things cost back then, and how you had to shop around to get a good deal. £100 was a lot of money back then, and getting 2 or 3 games for it was considered a good haul. Plus the mention of Blockbuster and rental shops really brings back memories of browsing those shelves on a Friday night, trying to pick something good for the weekend. Those were the days, eh? This page, alright, a proper retro blast from the past, takes you right back to the N64 days. On the left there, we've got a classic help wanted ad, N64 Magazine, always looking for folks to write game guides for them. Experts wanted, it says, for excellent rewards, which probably meant a free game and bragging rights down the pub. Then over on the right, the main feature is all about Diddy Kong Racing, specifically how to beat everyone at the battle modes. Remember Diddy Kong Racing? Massive game back then, especially if you had younger siblings, it was always on. They're even saying that DKR's battle modes are better than Mario Kart 64. Bit of a bold claim that for the time, Mario Kart 64 was king, wasn't it? But DKR did have its fans. It's written by N64 Magazine readers, Lionel Laurent and Tom Chase, so proper reader contributions, which was always a good thing to see in mags back then. There's a picture with Diddy Kong, Crunch, Timber and Pipsy, all looking a bit shiny and new in their little carts. Beneath that, they've got the rules if you wanted to write a guide for them, around 2,000 words, and focus on one aspect of a game, like this DKR battle mode feature. And if they liked your stuff, they might give you a wicked N64 Magazine jacket apparently, according to local homeboy James, which sounds about right. Magazine freebies were always decent. You had to send your guide to an address in Bath, proper old school mail-in submissions, no emails then. Good times, good times. This page depicts a how-to guide from N64 Magazine, focusing on choosing your character in Diddy Kong Racing. It's got a player select image at the top showing all the characters lined up. The article starts by saying you need to pick a character that suits your needs, mentioning that heavier characters are good at Icicle Pyramid but not Smoky Castle, and suggests that last man standing battles are better with characters with close control. Then it goes through each character one by one with a picture and a little description box. Starting with Crunch the Croc, they say he's slow to get going, and not great handling but maybe okay in battle modes, generally not very good though, bit harsh. Then there's Diddy, described as perfect for beginners, good all round, great acceleration and handling, and good for Icicle Pyramid, sounds like the safe choice. Next up is Bumper the Badger, bit slow to respond but good turning once you get used to him, apparently good in a plane or hovercraft, more of a battler than a racer apparently. Conquer the Squirrel is next, great acceleration and control, and amazing turns, but his plane is a weak point, bit of foreshadowing there, for his own game perhaps? Banjo is next, good top speed and fair acceleration, heavy, good for last man standing battles. The bottom row starts with Tipped Up the Turtle, great acceleration and speed, but handling can be a bit too quick, and he gets squeezed out in close battles apparently. Pipsy the Mouse is described as the fastest with lightning quick handling, but needs a master to cope with it. Timber the Tiger is a good compromise, robust weight and acceptable top speed, and a good choice for battle games, sounds pretty solid. Then there's TT the Clock, you have to beat all TT's ghost times to unlock him, and apparently, he's definitely fast but not really suitable for battle games. Bomb. Finally, there's Drumstick the Chicken, you have to beat Whizpig and do some frog jumping to get him. They say he's no racer but his weight makes him a force in battle games, so another one for battles then. Noof. Overall it's a decent rundown of the characters in Diddy Kong Racing, good for someone just getting into the game back in '98. Makes you think about which character you'd actually pick based on your playstyle, doesn't it? Probably Diddy for most people at the start, can't go wrong with a monkey in a cart, can you? This page from N64 Magazine must be from around '98, right? Blimey, takes me back. Anyway, it's all about getting the keys, in what looks like a kart racer, probably Diddy Kong Racing going by the look of that plain mouse thing. It's telling you where to find the battle keys if you're still struggling, which, if you were following the mag back then you probably shouldn't be. Bit cheeky saying are you blind? About the Fire Mountain key location mind you, backling. They've got little boxes showing the 4 key locations, Fire Mountain, Icicle Pyramid, Darkwater Beach, and Smoky Castle. For Fire Mountain, it's on Ancient Lake, just up a ramp on the right after the first bend. Icicle Pyramid is on Snowball Valley, you need to turn sharply right after the start to find a hidden niche. Darkwater Beach, on Crescent Island, is at the first fork, hidden on the seaward side of some stone pillars. And finally, Smoky Castle, on Boulder Canyon, involves ringing a bell, using the drawbridge, and hopping to a ledge for the key. Sounds a bit convoluted for a key, even for back then. Then there's a section specifically on Fire Mountain mode, looks like a battle mode in Ancient Lake. The objective is to grab dinosaur eggs from the lava pit, and bring them back to your nest to hatch. First to 3 wins. They're giving you tips, like Superstart to grab a red balloon, Guarding to defend your nest, Reload suggesting you don't always need to be on the attack, and Look out! For sneaky players, trying to steal your eggs. Thief section tells you to pinch eggs from other players if the lava pit is empty, and dropping eggs is about getting good at placing your eggs in your nest accurately. Finally, Artful Dodger says barrel rolling helps you dodge missiles. Solid tips really, if a bit basic, but hey, it was a simpler time for games, wasn't it? Good memories, this page. This page depicts a how-to guide from N64 Magazine, back in March '98 it seems, focusing on winning at the battle modes in Diddy Kong Racing. Remember Diddy Kong Racing? Yeah, proper kart racer that. Bit more to it than Mario Kart if you ask me, with planes and hovercrafts and all that. You act. Anyway, this page is all about mastering the mayhem in Icicle Pyramid and Smoky Castle battle arenas. For Icicle Pyramid, it's a last man standing sort of deal, classic battle mode really. They're suggesting missile spam, obviously bloodlust they call it, very dramatic. Lower floors a bit dodgy apparently with all the ricocheting missiles, and the advice to just keep changing levels if someone is after you is pretty standard stuff, isn't it? Radar tip is basically saying use homing missiles to be sneaky, hardly rocket science. And hide is just telling you to hang back if things get too hectic, again, pretty obvious if you want to survive. Then there's Smoky Castle, which is about grabbing bananas and stashing them in your chest. A bit more involved this one. Color tip is to remember your chest color, duh. Otherwise you're just chucking bananas in the wrong place like a right muppet. Single route advice is sensible. Stick to what you know. Central tip is to camp the courtyard and blow up anyone coming back from a banana run. Bit mean-spirited that, but effective I suppose. Splashdown is just saying if you fall in the moat, look for the ramp. Again, not exactly groundbreaking tactics. Minor tactic is laying mines behind balloons to hide them. Sneaky, I guess. And Last Ditch is all about hammering someone just as they're about to deposit their final bananas. Proper dirty tactic that, but hey, all's fair in love and kart racing battles, eh? So yeah, standard tips really, but back then, In '98 you'd be lapping this up, wouldn't you? Anything to get one up on your mates in Diddy Kong Racing. Good times. This page is a bit of a guide to the Darkwater Beach level in Diddy Kong Racing on the N64, showing you some tips to get ahead. It's broken down into sections, like Replay, which just says if you know Icicle Pyramid, you know this as it's the same idea but on water. Then there's Superstart, which is pretty obvious. Just grab the first red balloons and head to the beach with palm trees. Sting points out that area is a good sniper spot with red balloons around, handy for grabbing weapons. Minor is about mine placement, saying to put them under island arches, sneaky. And here's hopping, just reminds you that hopping can give you a bit of a speed boost and help dodge missiles. Everyone knew that though, didn't they? The bottom half of the page is all about cheat codes for Diddy Kong Racing. Remember spending ages typing these in? There's loads here. OFFROAD for four-wheel drive carts. Bogus bananas for bananas that power down. Vitamin B to regenerate bananas, and Blabbermouth, which makes the Hornplay voice samples. Bit of a laugh, that one. JOINTVENTURE lets you play adventure in two-player. And BODYARMOUR makes all balloons yellow. Then OPPOSITESATTRACT turns them into magnets. On the other side of the codes, there's Toxic Offender for green balloons, and Bombsaway for red ones. ROCKETFUEL makes them all blue. BYEBYE, BALLOONS disables weapons for the computer players, which sounds a bit boring to be honest. NOYELLOW, STUFF makes bananas useless, and ZAPTHE, ZIPPERS gets rid of the zippers on the tracks. TIMETOLOSE supposedly makes the computer players smarter. Good luck with that. W. Finally, there are some fun ones. FREEFORALL, which gives you level 3 items from balloons. Free Fruit to start with 10 bananas. Jukebox to unlock a music test in the audio options. Arnold and Teeny Weenies for big and tiny characters. Double Vision for multiple characters. Not sure about that one. And lastly, WHODIDTHIS to view the credits. So yeah, plenty of codes there to mess around with in Diddy Kong Racing. Hours of fun back in the day. This page depicts a tips page from what looks like a magazine, probably aimed at N64 owners back in the day, must be around '98. It's got cheat codes for FIFA 98, Road to World Cup and San Francisco Rush. For FIFA 98, it's all about entering cheat codes in the player edit screen. Remember that? Faffing about in menus to get silly effects. There's codes for Australia mode, which flips the screen upside down. A bit of a novelty, I suppose. Then pencil and paper mode, turning the graphics into line drawings. Sounds a bit odd. Not sure why you'd want that really. Tiny players to make the players small, and ghosts to make it more spiritual, whatever that means. Probably just makes them invisible or something. There's also a disappearing stadium code to speed things up, and a code called Burning Car in San Francisco Rush, making your car hotter, apparently by holding top C and pressing Z 4 times. Seems simple enough. San Francisco Rush gets a bit more love with other cheats. Take the wheel of a Formula 1 car. Everyone wanted to drive an F1 car, didn't they? Sounds like a bit of a grind to unlock it though, beating all the circuit races first, then upside down antics, another screen flipping trick, bit of a theme here, and variable viewing distance, which lets you change the camera zoom, making it like micro machines. They mention Codemaster's extra sensitive handling, probably taking a dig at another game there. Quality tippage indeed, as they say. It's classic tips and trick stuff from back then. Before the internet was really everywhere, you had to rely on these magazines for your cheat codes. Good times. This page depicts a section from N64 Magazine called Readers' Top 10 Tips, which was a staple back in the day. It's all about readers sending in their gaming secrets for a chance to win a coveted N64 pin badge, or even something extra special if your tip was the absolute bee's knees. Kicking things off at number 1 is a GoldenEye 007 tip for grabbing the clearance A keycard on the facility level. Apparently you've got to wait a bit for the scientist to pop off to the loo. Nature calls for everyone. Even boffins in labs then intercept him and hold him up until he coughs up the card. It sounds a bit cheeky, but back then, that's the kind of thing we lapped up. The writer, Z.Y. Nicholson from Bath, seems a bit sniffy about unofficial guidebooks, plugging his own GoldenEye FAQ instead. Bit of self-promotion there, eh, ZY? Next up, FIFA 98, Road to World Cup. This tip from David Woodison from Ayrshire is a classic bit of cheese. If you're getting thumped, pause the game and switch controllers to the other team to score some own goals, then swap back before the final whistle. Hardly sporting, but hey, desperate times and all that. Warrington Dorcas. Tip number 3 is for Yoshi's story. Neil Kenny from Crew has found a black Yoshi egg in the first level. You've got to find a cloud with a question mark and shoot it to get an egg, and complete the level with Yoshi to unlock Black Yoshi. Yoshi's story was a bit different, wasn't it? Not quite the Mario 64 killer some expected, but still had its charm. Riku. Diddy Kong Racing gets a look in at number 4. Alex Hinchcliffe from Bolton tells us how to get a green turbo boost by doing a loop in the plane, double tapping R, and releasing the accelerator at the right time. Diddy Kong Racing was proper good fun, especially multiplayer, a decent kart racer to rival Mario Kart. Zistaff. San Francisco Rush tip at number 5 from Tommy Earl in Newcastle, unlocking the 7th track, SFR Alcatraz, by using coins in the coin-op mode and coming first in each race on hard difficulty. San Francisco Rush was all about crazy arcade-style racing, wasn't it? Proper over-the-top stuff. New. Number 6 is F1 Pole Position 64, with a screenshot of the game. It's about qualifying for a race and getting pole position. Looks pretty straightforward. GoldenEye 007 pops up again at number 7, James Edwards from Runcorn suggesting throwing a grenade into a fire to increase the explosion range. Always good to know, more explosions are never a bad thing in GoldenEye. Duke Nukem 64 at number 8, Anthony Gill from Wolverhampton has a tip about falling through the air vents and taking out aliens, grabbing grenades and atomic health. Duke Nukem 64, bit of a guilty pleasure that one, not exactly cutting edge on the N64, but still a blast for some mindless shooting. Top Gear Rally at number 9, apparently holding L, R and down on the main menu, gets you extra grip. Top Gear Rally, remember that? Decent rally game, but Colin McRae Rally probably stole its thunder a bit. Rounding off the top 10 is Killer Instinct Gold. Rich Sampson from London tells us about pressing down and medium punch or kick for faster gameplay, and even faster gameplay with down and fierce punch or kick. Killer Instinct Gold was proper button mashy, but looked fantastic at the time, loads of combos and flashy moves. Below the tips is the Your Top Tip submission form, asking for the game name, the tip itself, and your details to send in by post to the magazine in Bath. Proper old school, sending things in by snail mail. If you didn't want to cut up your magazine, you could send a photocopy instead. It's all very 90s, isn't it? A nice little snapshot of gaming back then. This page is from the N64 Magazine. Looks like the tip section. They're having a bit of a go at the Nintendo hotline, saying you're better off reading their mag for game help, cheeky sods. Fods. There's a bit about Yoshi's story. They were worried it'd be a bit pants, but now they reckon it's a corker, whatever that means. Always had to wait ages for the PL versions back then. Worry. The main bit seems to be about Duke Nukem 64, showing you how to get to secret levels. Duke Burger, Lunatic Fringe, Freeway, and Area 51, those are the ones they're on about. They've got little screenshots showing you where to go, bits about red access cards, grenade launchers, swimming pools and all that. Yeah, Duke Nukem, pretty silly game really, but it was a laugh with your mates back in the day. Good times. This page from a retro N64 magazine, probably from around March 1998, is all about the Nintendo hotline, remember those? It's advertising their phone service where you can ring up and get tips and cheats for your games. They boast about having expert games players, and they're open 7 days a week, which was pretty good going back then. There's even an automated service for those late-night gaming emergencies, costing 50p a minute, ouch. They've got tips for Top Gear Rally, claiming it'll turn the game into a psychedelic experience that might upset your mum. The code is bottom C, Z, B, up, right, in case you're still playing it on your N64. They've also got a screenshot of Top Gear Rally, looking rather speedy for the time. Then there's Tetrisphere, which was a bit of a strange Tetris spin-off if I remember rightly. They've got codes for a new game mode, additional music, seeing the end credits, and level select. For the new game mode, you need to enter lines as your name, and you get some extra games similar to rescue mode. For extra music you enter G Alien Head, MEBOY. Apparently the alien head is the letter A, and you get more tunes under the audio options. To see the end credits you just put credits as your name. And for level select it just says you can choose any level in rescue, hide and seek and puzzle modes, so maybe that one's not a cheat code as such. Just a feature. There's a screenshot of Tetrisphere 2, looking all blocky and spherical. It's quite funny looking back at this now. Phoning up for game tips seems like ancient history with the internet and everything, but back then, this was the way you got your secrets. This page is a bit of a blast from the past, isn't it? It's got that classic N64 magazine vibe, all about proving you're the best at your games, proper competitive stuff. It kicks off with a bit of a chat about how mental things are. GoldenEye and Diddy Kong Racing were clearly the big hitters at the time, weren't they? Everyone was glued to those, especially after Christmas, according to the mag. There's talk about score to beat, which sounds like a regular thing they did, trying to get readers involved and showing off their skills. Seems like this month it's Diddy Kong Racing on Ancient Lake in Dino Domain, and they want you to get under 50 seconds to win a SharkPad Pro controller. Remember those chunky things? They were alright, I suppose, if you didn't mind looking like you were wrestling a brick. Then there's a bit about Top Gear Rally. Seems like not many people bothered to send in their times for that one. Bit of a shame for Boss's whip-cracking effort, as they put it. Bit sarcastic there from Zai, wasn't he always a bit like that? But someone did send in a blurry photo of a secret track in Top Gear Rally, which sounds intriguing. They are proper begging for more info on that secret track from readers. Must have been desperate for content, bless them. Then there's the usual high score tables, classic stuff for these mags. Super Mario 64, and Wave Race 64, in PAL and American/Japanese versions, for some reason. Loads of names and times listed, people showing off their foot race, with Cooper the Quick and Peach slide times in Mario, and Sunny Beach, and Dolphin Park in Wave Race. It's quite detailed. They even list the towns people are from all over the UK, and even a few from abroad. You can see people were really into shaving off those seconds back then. Good times, good times. This page from N64 Magazine, it's the letters page. Always a good bit to flick to. Right at the top it's telling you how to write in. Proper old school with a postal address and fax number, email too, getting modern. Looks like you could win a badge for getting your letter printed. Those were the days. Kicking off the letters is 10 times, where Stuart from Dorking is having a bit of a moan about Diddy Kong Racing, reckons it's better than Mario Kart 64, faster and more replayable. Blimey, strong words. Ed, the editor, just says hang on a mo, which is a bit cheeky. Next up, no patch. William from Reading is moaning about DKR again, saying it needs a patch even though it's easy. Says the graphics and sound are good, but the gameplay is lacking compared to Mario Kart 64. Ed's having none of it, says it's just opinions and it's 50-50 on letters so far. Looks like DKR is a bit divisive then. Warrora. Softrack is next. Paul from Nottingham is asking about the official N64 Softrack to store your games. Says he heard about a sequel to Ghouls and Ghosts. Must be talking about the arcade game. Not sure if that ever came to the N64 though. Ed says their spies saw G&G in progress. Probably just rumour mill stuff at that point. They also mention they don't know about the Softrack, but suggest ringing a shop called Chaps on page 105. Very helpful. Then there's a funny one called No. Anonymous by fax is threatening to cancel their subscription if they get rid of Jonathan, whoever Jonathan is. Bit dramatic, aren't we? Etch-a-Sketch is interesting. Nick from London is talking about the 64DD and Pocket Monsters, which we now know as Pokemon. He's wondering if Nintendo is focusing too much on Japan and not Europe and America. Says Pocket Monsters is massive in Japan and they might try the same strategy here with the 64DD. Reckons it'll be a while before the 64DD comes out here, if at all. Smart chap, he's pretty much bang on the money there. Morja. Lastly, background, where Nick from London again must be a regular letter writer, is talking about Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as we might call it. He's played it loads, mentions defeating Andros, he's still on about the 64DD, and thinks it might be a way to get better games out, but it'll take time. Ed agrees, saying Nintendo's DD strategy in the West needs to be tailored, and they'll have to make sure Pocket Monsters games are good here too. Prophetic stuff really looking back. So yeah, typical letters page, bit of moaning, bit of speculation, all about the hot topics of the time, Diddy Kong Racing and this mysterious 64DD thing and Pokemon starting to bubble under. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, it's the letters page, Dream On, which is all about game ideas from readers, and a section called the N64 Board, showing reader submissions pinned to a board, bit like a digital corkboard before the days of Pinterest, eh? In Dream On, there are a few game ideas knocking about. First up is Simpsons 64. Someone fancies a Simpsons game that's a bit GoldenEye and a bit Mario 64. Characters chucking donuts, and Maggie with a handbag weapon. Sounds a bit bonkers. Typical Simpsons, really. The reviewer, Ed, seems keen enough. Reckons there are not many good Simpsons games on the computers back then, hoping someone out there is listening. Then there's Horse Race 64. Someone wants a Mario horse racing game. You'd race as Mario characters on horses around courses, even with steeplechase fences. You could bet on races and unlock hidden characters like Red Rum and the Queen Mother. Ed's a bit cheeky, saying the Japanese are mad for horse racing, so who knows, it might just happen. He does point out the sumo wrestler character is a bit off though. Lastly in Dream On, is Battle of Britain 64. A World War II air combat game, Spitfires and Hurricanes, taking on bombing missions over Europe. Ed thinks it might be a ticklish subject for a Japanese company, but definitely okay with us. A bit of light sarcasm there perhaps. Moving on to the letters section itself, under titles like Persuading, someone's thanking them for bigging up Mischief Makers, reckons it's a right laugh. Ed says it's a pity it sold so few copies, So maybe it was a bit of a hidden gem then? Coincidence? Asks about a credit card advert in the mag, if James uses Alliance and Leicester. Ed confirms he does, and he's checking with his lawyers about a possible breach of contract and/or security. Sounds a bit mysterious, maybe some behind-the-scenes magazine drama there. This bad is about a score in a previous issue, where they said something was really awful, in the 0.19% range. Looks like the reader, MK, is pulling them up on it, Duca. Sorted is someone talking about Pokemon and Space World, and Japanese supermarkets selling stuff. It's a bit vague. Ed just mentions they had a problem with our Japanese PC word processor. Technology, eh? Commendable is from a Japanese reader enjoying the mag since coming to England, reckons Japanese games are good, and Puyo Puyo is indeed. They are a bit confused about useful phrases in Space World though. Ed just says, sorry about the words and phrases. Frightens is from someone saying, GoldenEye 007 is so good, it frightens them as games can't get better. Ed jokes it frightens them too, and they've sent Tim Weaver off to Rare to find out what scary stuff they are up to. Finally, the N64 board shows drawings and bits and bobs sent in by readers. There's a Yoshi drawing from Alistair in Glasgow, a Mario World character drawing by Shane Rental, a calendar pic of someone they can't quite place, and a Street Fighter-inspired drawing by Tyrone Parker from Bristol. And a little note asking for blank space fillers, sending stuff to the N64 board at a Bath address. All in all, a typical letters page from back in the day, full of reader opinions and game ideas, and a peek at some reader artwork. This page from the magazine's letters section kicks off with readers' thoughts and questions for the N64 team. Someone's asking which James Bond characters the team fancies themselves as, and it sounds like the editor, Ed, has a bit of fun allocating roles like the traitorous 006, Baron Samedi, and Oddjob to the team. There's a funny one about Total Magazine sounding like a petrol station, which is a bit cheeky. Someone else is sending in birthday wishes, bless them. And then there's a slightly bizarre letter about a newsagent and a rotten infection. Not sure what to make of that. Someone else wants to cause mayhem in SimCity, with torpedoes, which is a bit random. And then there's a complaint about having the same surname as a writer. Poor blokes. Someone smashed expert mode on Lilac Wars, good on them, and another eagle-eyed reader spotted a mistake in the Banjo-Kazooie preview naming 5 worlds, when there are only 4 mentioned initially. Sneaky Ed reckons he nearly got away with it. Moving on to the invention corner, these are always a laugh. First up is the Rumble Chair. Some bloke in Devon has created a chair packed with rumble packs, inspired by interrogation scenes in films or something. Sounds a bit intense. Then there's a game pack storage unit. A fella named Sam thinks the game boxes are rubbish, so he's designed a unit to store 10 games and their manuals. Actually, that's not a bad idea. Those cardboard boxes were a bit flimsy, weren't they? Finally, there's the Snowboard Pack, a full-sized snowboard controller. Bit bonkers, but you can see the appeal if you're into your snowboarding games like 1080 Degrees Snowboarding and Twisted Edge. Apparently it's got a hefty £80 price tag though, blimey. Cheer. Then we get to So Tell Me This, and Things We Know You Need to Know, which are reader questions answered by the magazine. Someone's asking when Mission Impossible is out, and if it'll have link-up, which is on everyone's minds at the time. Answer is before summer, but no link-up. Zelda on cartridge is mentioned. With someone worried about length, they reckon it'll be short, less than Super Mario even. Import prices are high due to exchange rates and VAT apparently. Then questions about Resident Evil and other games coming from Capcom, Namco, Midway, etc. Resident Evil is August, and they're not sure about the others. In Things We Know, Micro Machines 64 is a bit delayed, and the 64DD is still a mystery, no surprise there. Pocket Monsters, or Pokemon as we'd come to know it, is hopefully coming this year. Becoming a game tester? Apply to software companies, but the pay is apparently awful. Zelda will cost more, naturally. PAL Zelda is still slated for October 24th. Apparently the Zelda shown at Space World was sprite-based, interesting. Silicon Valley Zelda and Kirby's Air Ride are still unknown quantities. And finally, Mortal Kombat Mythologies is apparently a bit rubbish. Only 9% thought it was generous. Ouch. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 13, is advertising what's coming up in the next issue, number 14. It's got a rather dramatic headline, Frights, Anoraks, Friction, which sounds a bit over the top, doesn't it? Looks like they're hyping up some sort of extreme sports game, maybe with a horror or sci-fi twist, or maybe I'm reading too much into it. There's a snowy mountain graphic, so definitely something to do with winter sports. Down in the corner there's a little box promoting a double game guide plus number 3. Seems like they were doing a series of these tip books to go with the magazine. Must have been quite handy back then, before the internet was really a thing for game hints. There's also a review for 1080-degree snowboarding featured, saying Nintendo launched this fantastic TV player boarding sim. Bit of a weird way to describe a game, TV player. They reckon it's like Wave Race but for snow, and they're quite impressed, calling it a massive snowflecked review. Sounds like ZY, the reviewer, was having a good time with it. Precare, wire. At the bottom it says plus, one very special blue-haired guest star, you know who we mean. That's intriguing, probably someone like Sonic, or maybe even someone from Final Fantasy. They were always trying to get the cool characters on board. You know who we mean. Then there's the usual stuff, advertising the next issue being on sale Wednesday the 25th of March, and a bit more blurb saying, everything PAL and import reviewed, stacks of pictures from the biggest new games, eye-wateringly huge guides, standard magazine talk, trying to make it sound essential, N64ness than any other mag. Bit cheeky, but that was magazines for you back then, all a bit competitive. On the right side, there's an index for issue 13 itself, so we can see what was actually in this magazine. Looks like reviews for Fighter's Destiny, Cruisin' USA, Tetrasphere, and SimCity 2000. Wetrix's Future Look, and Biofreak's Future Look are also listed, so previews maybe? Diddy Kong Racing gets a mention too, and there are how-to guides on various things, like choosing your top 20 games and qualifying for the World Cup in FIFA 98. Right, proper mix of stuff in there. Pachinko review, Skill Club 64, Spy Master Compo, blimey, they covered everything, didn't they? Snowbo Kids is in there too, must be related to the 1080-degree snowboarding review, perhaps a comparison. Gasp Future Look as well, lots of games to keep an eye on. All in all, a pretty packed issue, issue 13, and issue 14 was promising even more. Takes you back, doesn't it?